Dr. Ramani, what are the subtle early warning signs that we can watch out for to spot if a narcissist is trying to trap us?
So it's what happens to everyone in a narcissistic relationship. And there maybe the devalue phase has started, right? So they're going through that love bombing and it's all great and it's idealized and it's wonderful. And then little by little, the invalidation, manipulation, gaslighting are all showing up, right? And so at that phase, let's say the person in the relationship is gaslighted, right? I never said that. I never did that. You keep putting words in my mouth. There's something wrong with you. And the person's like, that's not true. And they go and they stand their ground. They're like, you're wrong. And they get into the fight with them, right? But when that happens enough times, and as I've said repeatedly, narcissistic people are really good fighters. It will break people down because they're also invested in going back to all that feel-good, love-bombing, dopamine-rich, like, ooh, this is wonderful kind of relationship, right? Mm-hmm. So the standing your ground phase is when people are still interacting with this relationship like it's a normal, regular relationship. In the second phase, people are confused. They don't know what to do. The key thing is that in phase 2 is when we hope people get therapy. And this is often when people confused enough who are sort of like, what is happening? Maybe it's something wrong with me. They'll come into therapy. I'm having this problem in my relationship. Sometimes people will come into therapy and say, I've become really anxious about my relationship. A lot of people don't just come into therapy and say, I think I'm in a relationship with a narcissist. Some do, but not all. If we get people in phase 2, we can do a lot with them before they get to phase 3, which is really a sense of hopelessness and despair. There's nothing they can do. They're fully blaming themselves. They think all of this is their fault. The narcissistic person may even have a person convinced at phase 3 that you're the one who's behaving badly in this relationship, and I can't believe I'm putting up with this. And people start to believe it, like maybe I'm the narcissist. Maybe I'm the bad one. And so phase 3 is tough because by phase 3, people might also be sliding into depression. They might, in more severe cases, it might be complex trauma. Like it really depends on how severe, how long the relationship has lasted, all of that. So we want them in phase 2. Ideally, we want to get them even before phase 1, or in phase 1, we want them to say bye. And I always tell people, like, the genius is the person who stays around for all the goodies and fun and love bombing and then gets out. You know, so it's like you stay long enough to get the goodie bag at the party and then you leave before you have to talk to too many people. Bye, thanks for my gift.
Yeah.
See ya. So it's that. But unfortunately, most people don't do that. Everyone stays at the casino too long. It's the nature of human beings.
And so why is understanding these phases important when we're talking about how to, you know, either heal or leave or recover from a relationship, or whether even maybe you're in one right now?
Because it's a systematic process. I think that people think that as soon as they realize it, they're going to realize it quickly. The red flags are going to be obvious. They don't realize how gradual it is. If it happened overnight, it wouldn't happen, right? People would pick up on it. But honestly, by the time that phase 2 is happening, it's quite conceivable that your friends and family like this person. They might think this person's charming and fun and generous. They pick up the check, whatever nice things that they're doing, because they're not seeing them perhaps that often. Maybe you have 1 or 2 clever friends or family member that are looking at this from the outside and saying, something about here that I don't like about this I don't love. But by and large, especially if the narcissistic person only sees friends or family every so often, they may have convinced them, or vice versa. If the narcissistic person senses that your friends or family are a little concerned or suspicious, they will isolate the person isolate the partner. So they will say things to the person in the relationship like, you know, your sister talks smack about you all the time. Like, why do you put up with that? Or, you know, your mom really is intrusive in your life. So they put all these seeds of doubt in the person who is invested in making the relationship work. So they believe that they sort of want to believe them. So that might lead them to distance themselves from these other people. And then they'll lose that support and they'll lose those voices that are actually maybe seeing that narcissistic person more accurately or clearly.
So if you understand it, then even if someone's telling you something that maybe you don't want to hear about someone that you really like, love, etc., you're more likely to listen and not dismiss their opinion. Got it. Because, yeah, there was somebody that I knew that was now just having known you and done all this work. I had no idea that he was a narcissist. It's clear as frickin' day. I mean, he's frickin' textbook now that I look back. And there was one person, it was my husband's mum, so my mother-in-law. She, from day one, was like, I don't like him. I don't know if she used the word manipulative, but at the moment, I just dismissed my mother-in-law. I was like, well, she's just going to pick on someone, right? So you dismiss their opinion, and now you better believe I'm like, my mother-in-law saw it.
Yeah, so and if you want, remember, many people might be invested in sort of, they want this relationship to work. So they will distance from these voices, like the sister who might see it, or the mother-in-law who might see it, or the friend who might see it, and distance, because otherwise they know someone in their midst is seeing something that makes them uncomfortable, or they might actually believe, if the narcissist also says, like, I don't think this person actually does have your back, and they may start to believe that.
Oh, so what would you say then in that situation where maybe you're not clear yet, you still have you're in the love bombing phase, so you can't quite see it yet, and you just feel really good, and someone comes to you, let's say someone's listening right now. What's like a great way to even respond to someone bringing up that sort of thing? Because I'm sure your automatic response is to ignore them.
Or even defend your partner to them.
Oh, yes,
that's the
even
real
worse,
danger.
yeah.
And that's why I often tell people, if you are a support, let's say you're watching someone who's having a relationship where you're seeing red flags. So in other words, this is your friend who's in a new relationship, and that new relationship seems to have red flags. It might even be a narcissistic relationship, whatever. The worst thing you could do is to go up to that person and say, hey, I think this person is a narcissist. Because 9 times out of 10, your friend will defend that person. And in fact, put you to, how could you say that? Or you're jealous of me. You're competitive with me. You've never wanted me to be in a relationship. I might get really dark, frankly. So if you're in the relationship and people approach you with like, I'm not feeling this, like this is making me uncomfortable, hard as it may be, you have to look inward and say, really, like what would their motivation be to say this, and say, can you ask for more information? Can you tell me what it is you're seeing here that's bothering you? Because it may line up with things you felt uncomfortable with, but you're trying to sort of override. But it's very, very hard to bring people from the brink. And a lot of people often don't want to tell their friend or family member that I'm a little worried about your new relationship, because their fear is that they're going to alienate that friend or family member, right? They don't want to lose that relationship. And so most people don't say anything. And in fact, a lot of survivors have said to me, I got out of the relationship. Sometimes it's like a 30-year relationship. And they'll say, my friends were all saying, oh, we're so glad he's gone. We couldn't stand him. And the person will say, well, why didn't you tell me something sooner? And they said, really, we wanted to, we tried, but we also were worried that there seemed to be a time you would have probably gotten mad, and the person would have to acknowledge, yeah, they're probably right.
Good. And even in that situation, I can imagine the narcissist probably likes it, because let's say your friend has warned you, and now there's a bit of friction between them, and now the narcissist can use that as a way to pull you apart from the friend.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And they're going to do that. They're always going to do. I mean, it's textbook how much they will plant some seed of doubt, that they're like, you're better than them, you're smarter than them, they don't have your best interests at heart, they seem to be like competitive with you, it feels like they're always putting you down. The narcissist will find something to say that will cause some level of distance, or at least insert some doubt around that relationship. Yeah.
That's a brilliant lesson tactic as well that can go along with that, because I think that, when we have people close to us, it can lead to hopefully them speaking up that can either help us. But if we're not listening to them, then I can just imagine that's the worst thing, because it's actually compounding itself, that now you're isolating yourself more and more from the people that actually care.
That's right.
So thank you for that. Talk to me now about the emotions that we all go through and understanding those emotions so that we can navigate them. So you talk about the self-blame that we go through. Talk to me about self-blame. What does that show up as? How do we get out of it? So that when we get there, God forbid, if anyone's listening, ends up in that self-blame spiral, that they can actually understand what it is and call it out, and then actually try and not go down that spiral.
Well, everyone engages in self-blame. It's the one universal of the experience of people in narcissistic relationships to some degree or another. That's why the book is called It's Not You, really, because of the self-blame part, where it's just sort of like, people, it's got to be me. And that's where I'm saying, it's not you. It really isn't. And so the self-blame has a lot of roots to it. We can think about it most basically in attachment terms, right? The experience of attachment has always been, usually been a conversation about children. that attachment is a survival need for a child. And a child who has a secure attachment has a predictable, responsive caregiver who keeps them safe, who responds to their needs. And from that safe base, from that secure environment, the child is able to explore and sort of come into their own, but always knowing they sort of have a psychological soft place to land, right? So that's what we want for every child, is a secure attachment. But if you have parents that are neglectful or intermittently available, or make their needs more important than the child's needs, you can see kids who develop what are called avoidant styles or anxious attachment styles. And these are more of these sort of insecure attachment styles. Now fast forward into adulthood. Attachment styles matter there too. If we're, as an adult, we have a secure attachment with someone, we don't panic when they go out of town. We miss them, but we don't panic. We're able to have our own lives separate from them, but also able to comfortably come together with them. But adults can also have anxious and avoidant attachments, and it can very much affect their relationships, right? But the reason I bring up all this stuff about attachment style is that in a child, okay, when the parent is not there for them the way they need. The child doesn't know. The child can't articulate, I need my parent to be this, this, and this. For a child, it's all physically felt. It's all being held in the nervous system. All they know, though, is that their parent is expressing that they feel let down by the child. Why didn't you do this? Why couldn't you be more this? It's very much a conditional love situation. But when a child has those attachment disruptions, when the child has parents who are not meeting their needs or even shaming their needs, the child only has one choice, and that's to blame themselves. Because if they were to blame the parents or see the parents as being the problem, then what? They're screwed, because they need the parent for survival. Attachment becomes a survival need at that stage. By blaming themselves, the child can internalize it and say, well, if it's my fault, I can fix it. The parent gets to remain sort of pristine in the child's view. The child remains safe, but now the child is, I'm not good enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not this enough. I need to be better. I need to be better. I need to be better. So I'm safe. Now take that style of thinking. I need to be better to be safe. Press fast forward, put it in a 30-year-old. I need to be better to be safe. And now you get into people who are struggling with perfectionism and trying to be all things to all people and all of that, right? So that's the nature of the self-blaming. Now, let's say that didn't happen to a person in childhood. They actually had a perfectly fine, happy, loving, normal childhood. They get into adulthood. They get into a narcissistic relationship, okay? So they do have a secure attachment from childhood. So they have a capacity for a secure attachment in adulthood, right? They get into a narcissistic relationship. They're confused because they had this love bombing time. Now it's not going so well. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. And the narcissist is gaslighting them and telling there's something wrong with them. And they kind of believe it. And if you read all of our relationship books that are out there and all the relationship experts, you know what they say? Well, both parties are partly responsible for what happens in a relationship. Mm-hmm. And a person in a narcissistic relationship internalizes that, well, all the books are saying that, so this must partly be my fault. So maybe I'm the one to blame. And the narcissist is like, yeah, you kind of are to blame, because narcissistic people will always shift blame and put responsibility on other people so they can maintain this perfect sense of themselves. That's how that happens in adulthood. It's more of a cognitive process in adulthood. It's an absolutely primitive, physical, emotional experience if it started in childhood.
That is the best explanation I've ever heard of self-blame.
Oh, thank you.
Ever. And do you think having had the experience with so many different narcissists in different areas of your life has compounded that self-blame?
It's what caused it. It's what caused it. Mm-hmm. Yep. If I could be better, then I would be lovable. That could be my motto.
Mm. And so for you now, the self-blame, is that like a flag for you, like an identifying marker when it comes up?
Well, there's two pieces to that, Lisa. I have to own that self-blame is sort of my go-to, right? So I'm going to use today as an example between you and I. So it makes it very alive. This morning, I had a snafu. And the traffic came and I had to do another kind of a live appearance. And I said to my assistant, I said, you've got to get in touch with Lisa's people. There's no way I'm going to get to where she shoots in time. I'm going to miss the live. I promised the people I do the live on time. You know, they had agreed to that, and it's a live show. It's going to mess up their show, right? So I said, can you please get in touch with Lisa's people? And I texted you, and I said, I'll pull off the freeway. I'll go home. I'll do that show. And can they start an hour late? So the self-blame was my immediate places. I've let Lisa down. I tried to do too much. I talked for 7 extra minutes to someone in the house that I needed to than I should have. And maybe if I got on the road, actually it still wouldn't have worked. But I immediately went to, I messed up. I'm the problem. I let everyone down. I am so lucky that Lisa's nice, because you see what I'm saying? So the entire narrative is everyone around me is right. I'm wrong. I'm bad. I'm foolish. I'm stupid. Nobody in this scenario was toxic. You weren't. Your team wasn't. The other people weren't. Nobody was bad in this. I went right there. So that's why I want to say it's almost like I couldn't have perceived that as a signal, because I was blaming myself. It's not because you did something wrong to me. You were totally fine with it, but I still got lost in. There's even that, I would even say, the more primal fear of like, oh, Lisa's not going to want to work with me anymore because I'm asking for all this. It felt entitled to me to ask for an hour more. But that's my point. I went down that rabbit hole, and I'm like, well, there's nothing I can do about it because I can't turn this car into an airplane. I cannot get there in time. And so I hope she's okay with it. So that signal of self-blame there didn't signify anything except an ancient wound I carried.
So obviously, for the record, it didn't bother me in the slightest. Like, when it comes to you, I'm so freaking chilled. Like, I've got the day with you. What am I complaining? And what's interesting, as your friend, I had a feeling that's the emotion you were going through. And actually knowing that about your friend is actually quite a helpful thing.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's not like I was saying, we need to start an hour late, but still end on time. That would have been a little bit more of an issue, right? But say, okay, I can work any way you want, just please let me get here an hour late, right? So, but you also know that about me. So it might be the kind of thing where maybe with someone else, you'd be like, oh, come on. Like, we set this schedule, and you might know about something like, oh my gosh, I know how much they're beating themselves up about this, and we can work with this, so let's not make this a thing. That I think knowing this about the people we care about. And I've always said that love, true love in a relationship, means that we're the custodian of each other's vulnerabilities and wounds, that we learn to care for the vulnerable parts of the other. And that means then that everyone's got something. And that if we are truly signing up into a loving relationship with this other person, we listen and we pay attention to learning what those vulnerabilities are. And we're very careful with those things, more careful than we'd be with someone else, because they would have had different wounds, not the same wounds, right? And it's not like you're enabling me saying, oh, just come anytime you want. You can even cancel. You weren't saying that. Like, this was understood that this was going to happen. But that you also knew, like, my friend is probably going to struggle with this because I know her. We can be that to each other. But that's not what happens in the narcissistic relationship. They will weaponize your self-blame and double down on that and say, yep, it is your fault.
They'll use that as a way to gain even more power over you. Ooh, yeah. So being able to work on that self-blame, especially if you're in a narcissistic relationship then, because you're really taking a weapon away from them.
That's exactly right. So once you take away the self-blame, and I don't know that any of us fully take it away. I'm in some narcissistic relationships I can't get my way out of, I'm very aware of it. But that self-blame almost moves in like it's such a quick physiological reaction for me. I can't really get ahead of it. The difference is it didn't stop me, because there's a time I would have made things worse by saying, I can't let down Lisa. I can't let down the other person. I have to be on the track. So I wouldn't have even thought to ask for that solution of, can we start an hour late? And then it would have been a disaster. I would have been pulled over on the side of the road trying to do the one thing on the phone, and the signal might not have been good, and I probably would have burst into tears and all this other stuff. So my point then becomes is that for a person who's been through it, like myself, I created a trusting relationship with you and your team. That allowed me to build a new muscle of, I can communicate a need. What was my need? I need to start this an hour late. Your team received that need lovingly and said, no problem. So that's hard for survivors to express a need. But if we have a few success experiences with that, we may try it again with other healthy people and slowly find our voice. But where once upon a time, the whole self-blame thing would have led me to make it worse by trying to get here on time, failing that and failing the other show, I've learned then to express a need and actually do it. Does that make sense? That's progress. That's progress.
Wow, and that just shows, I mean, thank you, because I have not been in a relationship like that, you know, I obviously don't have that same experience. So it wouldn't have dawned on me that there's this whole load of, like, basically luggage that comes along with you being an hour late, right? Like for me, I'm just like, hey, it's an hour late. My day's booked for you. In a way, it's not a big deal. And so for me, it's literally it hasn't impacted my, just move on and, you know, I do my day. And so when I think about the baggage that somebody who's been in a narcissistic relationship may carry that no one else sees, that's like completely under the radar, becomes like, wow, fascinating and really beautiful. I think that when you can be open with somebody that can then not use it as your vulnerability, it really does make you connect. Because if I didn't know that about you, imagine I just text back, okay, and I don't know that about you because I'm very busy a lot. I text people okay a lot. But with you, I knew not to text okay.
Interesting. So you see, there was that we call that attunement, right? That you were so attuned to me that you're like, okay, let me give this person a little bit more because this might feel dismissive at a time when a person is feeling perhaps very triggered or upset. And saying all this, I'm so excited. And it calmed me. I have to be frank with you. I can even tell you the point of the freeway I was on at that. I calmed down immediately. My driving probably improved. I knew I was going to be able to go home. And because of that, I got home. I set myself up. I was even able to work calmly for 30 minutes until the next interview started. Had I just gotten okay, it's quite conceivable I would have been on edge that entire time and wondering, oh my gosh, Lisa's going to be so mad when I see her.
And that's where I think a lot of probably the difficulty comes for you in healing, because you're like, well, in order for me to get what I need, you said it earlier, I need to be able to vocalize it. But if I vocalize it, I'm now leaving myself vulnerable for then someone to use it against me.
Building your confidence isn't easy, but let me tell you, it's freaking hard when your hair is falling out, when your hormones are changing. Look, I know you guys are used to seeing me with braids, but right now I don't have them in because my hair is legitimately falling out. I just got clumps of hair in my hand in the shower the other day. And so in order for me to not succumb to feeling badly about myself, I'm making sure that I'm taking my bean minerals right here and putting them in my morning coffee every single day so that I can get the nutrients I need. Here we go, Mum. In my Wonder Woman mug, because it does matter, guys. I'm having those every single morning in order to prevent my hair from still falling out, and then also giving it the nutrients it needs in order so that it can grow back. So that's what I'm doing. And guys, if you want to give Beam a shot, click the link below. I'm telling you, you will not regret it. It is my go-to thing right now as my hormones are changing and I need the nutrients I need. You won't freaking regret it.
Because of the experience one has, right? We make tracks. How do we learn? It's like things happen over and over again. And it almost creates these like the way wagon wheels used to create ruts in the road. It's the same thing here. It just sort of creates this pathway in our brain. Express need, lose love. Express need, anger comes. Express need, be shamed. That happens tens of thousands of times. That's the only thing you associate with expressing a need. Many survivors of narcissistic abuse try to do everything by themselves to the point of exhaustion, partly because it's realistic. They can't count on the narcissistic person to do anything, but it really leaves them like, dude, they burn themselves out. And so sometimes when people give me the advice, like, do less, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to live in the world of doing less. I really do. That doesn't always come automatically, if you will. So, but people who are really still in it, they're in the relationships, they're interacting with more than a few narcissistic folks, they don't have a choice. They have to, or the things won't get done, because if they express the need to the narcissistic person, not only is the narcissistic person not going to meet the need, they're going to scream at them. So you get 0 for the price of 2, basically. So that's not a very nice experience. And so that, in all of that, it's that awareness that relationship between expressing a need. And so to me, healing means I work with folks and teach them to express the need. Sometimes that happens in therapy. So basically the client will say, I am so sorry. I feel terrible asking this. Can I change my appointment time? I'm like, sure, no problem. Or if they can't, I'll say, you know what? Tomorrow that time's not available. If it comes available, I'll tell you. And if it doesn't, I'll let you know too. And I'll say, I'm so sorry the time didn't become available. But then we'll talk about it in session. Because I'll say, how did that feel? And how did it feel that I couldn't accommodate? They said, no, you were cool about it. And I said, and then when I'm able to change it, they had the success experience of expressing a need and the need being met.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we just touched on self-blame. We're going to go to the next one, which is another emotion that I think can really trip us up, is shame.
Shame is sort of the mothership in narcissistic relationships because both the narcissistic person is feeling shame and the person in the relationship is feeling shame for very different reasons. So the narcissistic person, part of the reason their behavior is so problematic is all of this shame, right? For them, the shame is that they will be found out to not be perfect, to not be the most powerful, right? It's as though someone's going to come and take off their Superman cape and they're just going to be a regular person. That's the source of their shame. Because they feel so much shame and it's unprocessed, they project it onto everybody else. So anybody who's in a relationship with a narcissistic person is in the splash zone of their shame. Then you have the person in the relationship who feel shame at being in a relationship that's unhealthy, who feel shame at not being able to express their needs, who feel shame that they are keeping their relationship secret from other people because it looks ridiculous, who feel shame that they don't have the courage to leave or they're not leaving, who feel shame that they're thinking terrible thoughts about someone they're supposed to love and that they're disloyal. So the shame that's happening for the survivor is quite different than the shame that's happening for the narcissist. We never behave well when we're experiencing shame. Shame is sort of it's a public emotion, right? It's the feeling judged about the things we've done that are quote unquote bad, but we're often taking things that aren't necessarily bad things, like feeling like we can't share our relationship because it'll be judged, because we're afraid it'll be judged. That's the public piece of it. That's the shame, right? Shame leads people to hide. Shame leads people to act out. Shame is probably the core of all bad behavior on the planet. If we could address shame, that's Brene Brown's entire body of work, then we would be in a much better place. But the shame of the survivor is made worse because there's people in the world who are saying, you're overblowing this narcissistic thing. You have no right to diagnose your partner or your parent or whoever the hell this person is. Why don't you just leave them? What's wrong with you? All of that drives their shame.
So in those, knowing all of the drivers of shame, and that when you're in a narcissistic relationship, you have probably more of that, even more so, right? Because like you broke down, you're hiding things, you're having to, lessen yourself, especially if, let's even say, in the public eye, you're seen as this really strong, badass woman. That must be even freaking harder.
It's terrible. I'm so glad you brought up that point about people who, to the world, look badass, strong, tough. The number of, it's interesting. Even in Hollywood, the celebrity world, more and more people are coming out and being transparent about their narcissistic relationships. Sometimes they're calling them emotionally abusive, but you're seeing people talk about it. People who seem like the most together, the most with it, like top of their game, worth $1 gazillion trillion. We're like, you're going through this too? And I think that this is what we need to remember is that while I think that the impacts of this are far, far worse for people who don't have resources because they don't have therapists they can turn to, they don't have lawyers to help with divorces, they don't have new apartments they can move to, they don't have those things. So they often have to endure it. They don't have the support they need, all of that, that it still operates the same way. And that I think sometimes when you are sort of up here and you're going through this, the shame about, I should be smarter than this, right? It isn't about smart. Nobody is being taught this. And you know how I feel about this. I think that the field of mental health has let people who are in these relationships down. We haven't given them the vocabulary. We're more quick to shame people like, well, I don't know, let's not get so focused on their personality. Let's focus on you. No, let's not focus on me. If I go outside and I get wet because it's raining, it's because it's raining. It's not because there's something about me that's creating wet. It's the same thing, that you're in this relationship with this person. They're an issue. They're the stimulus. And listen, the good therapist will talk about it. They'll say, yo, your husband sounds like narcissistic. And that will give the person saying, okay, I'm not crazy. Like, thank you so much. That can literally take therapy and push fast forward button for like 6 months worth of work. And now you've got something to work with. People say, okay, I'm not out of my mind. And Lisa, people say, how do you know? They're just telling you their side of the story. Something changed since I trained to be a therapist and now, which is now there are cell phones. People say, take a look at this email. And you can tell it's from someone else. I can see, and I'll read the email. And I mean, I'll think like, it's almost so there must be some narcissism AI generator that's generating these emails because they all read the same way, and I'm like, it's very clear. They will bring in emails. They will bring in text messages. They will bring in voice recordings. It is unmistakable to me that the person they're in a relationship with is narcissistic.
It never dawned on me that you personally didn't even have that back in the early days.
No, when I first started training in graduate school, it was the early 1990s. And we didn't have none of this. I mean, you'd have to walk around with a tape recorder in your pocket. Remember how big those used to be?
You couldn't hide that shit.
Big, like this massive thing on your belt or something. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have, unless people, it's not going to have a letter. You know what I'm saying? Like, no one's going to, I guess every so often maybe someone had a letter, but it's not like the Quicksilver communication. So we didn't have that. And I think that the existence of that has changed the game for us almost having an evidence base, like read these texts. And they'll almost watch my face go from like, they'll watch and I'll say, this is horrifying. And they'll say, I'm so used to getting texts like this that it's not even registering as horrifying to me anymore.
So new technology like text has actually helped us.
It has helped and harmed us, right? Because I think what it's done is it's created one more tool for them to engage abusively. Where it's helped in therapy is it's given us the evidence base of what's happening in this relationship. Because when we talk about something, it changes. But I have one client who would just keep bringing in these voice recordings. And literally I say, we only have 50 minutes. And the client would say, I don't care. We're going to spend 20 minutes listening. This client would press play. And I would make notes, and it was horrifying. But the client said, watching your face as you listen to this was healing for me. Because this is what I've grown up with. This is all I've ever known. And for you to hear this and for me to see this on your face, I now know I'm not crazy. The problem is that people will bring in the email, the recording, or the text, and they'll say, I'm embarrassed. I'm so ashamed. Because basically they're like, I'm still in this. And look at this, so it doesn't necessarily alleviate it. It's just it's more of a validation. But that shame piece is deep. And a lot of people feel as though, because the narcissistic gaslighting will leave them feeling as though they're part of the problem. They're complicit in this. They're engaging in this. In fact, that they might even be a terrible person because they're thinking disloyal thoughts. That they're saying, I hate my father, or I wish I never met this horrible man that I married or something. And the challenge is that those thoughts leave people wondering if they're just terrible people. And that's a concept we call moral injury. The idea that somebody feels like they did a bad thing.
Actually, and even just thinking even through this, I would think about, as if I was to replay, I think part of me would beat myself up for not having said something different, or, like if you're hearing the abuse, and then you hear, or if I had then heard myself saying, okay, I think that would dredge up some uncomfortable feelings that I didn't stand up for myself, that I didn't push back. And then I think that actually would probably cause more shame for me.
And that's the challenge. And so this is where the education part of working with clients who are experiencing narcissistic abuse is, these are the reasons why you didn't respond. There's a reason for this. And that's that nervous system stuff and those nervous system responses and that sense of safety and the fact it's going to go nowhere. When people have a map for why they kept hitting the walls they were hitting, it helps them feel like, okay, this is actually how I behaved is what's to be expected kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. So the other emotions that we have to embrace during this period that you said, that you've really eloquently spoke about and written about your book, is confusion and despair. Mm-hmm.
So confusion, as somebody you love, is being invalidating, and then you have a nice weekend, and then they scream at you on Tuesday. the confusion is it's the backing and forthing, right? It's the just as a person's like, this is a terrible relationship, I need to get out. It's exactly what Rebecca's analogy was. They catch you at just as you're about to hit the ground from the 100 stories up, right? So it's that being pushed off and being caught, being pushed off and being caught, that the person's like, I don't know what I'm I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. And when we have this, especially the longer term the relationship, the life we have this life together and we have this together and we've been through this together. And especially if you have things like kids, any of those things that can really bulk up that connective tissue. People are confused. Am I to blame? Are they right? They told me I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am. I do have a history of depression. Maybe that's why I'm like this. You know, I don't pay attention. I've been distracted. Maybe I'm disorganized. On and on and on. It is an indoctrination process. So people are confused. They'll have moments where like, this doesn't seem right, but then they'll have moments of like, no, it's right. And then you add to that, people don't want to change the status quo, that they are afraid of like what would happen if they ended it. They're afraid what would happen if they stayed in it. So people are chronically confused. And because of that confusion, they start to believe that they're somehow impaired, and that plays into that gaslighting.
And so how about the despair?
Well, the despair is this idea that it's never going to get better. It's never going to change. I'm always going to suffer. And here's where people might be suffering frank depression, pretty severe anxiety. At the most severe, there might be people who are even experiencing sort of thoughts of self-harm or ending their life, in which case it is absolutely essential that a person seek out emergency services, whether that's calling 911, checking themselves into a hospital, whatever it is, it's getting help immediately, because this can bring up that sense of helplessness. And people going even through these divorce procedures will say, it's the most helpless I've ever felt because I couldn't see an end to it. And it seems as though no matter what I said, nothing was being heard and there's going to be harm to my kids or the future or whatever. So that's what the despair is. It's just sort of the sense of there's no coming out of this. This is forever going to be a kind of a living hell. And it can change people can literally develop mental illnesses around that stress. I'll give you a classical example. Person goes up to a narcissistic person in a life partner, whomever, and says, hey, you're not going to believe it. Like they're jumping me up to the promotion. I am super excited. Like I didn't think I'd get it, but I've been putting in the extra hours. I can't, I'm so excited. And the narcissistic person will say, you sure you got this? Like that was quick. Like really? Can you handle that? And remember, you're already in a relationship with somebody who's been manipulating and gaslighting and getting him in. But they'll like, you sure you could do that? Now, someone will say, well, they're just projecting their insecurity. I understand that. But now you're like, ooh, I just got this big promotion. Can I handle this? They'll get those digs in all the time. Or they'll compare you to someone else. Like, you'll make a beautiful dinner and they'll sit down and say, oh, I see what you're trying to compete with my sister. You think you can cook like her? So you've made this amazing dinner, and then it's triangulated into this almost. You're made to look foolish, or you might do yourself up, fix your hair, dress up, and they'll say, well, "What's this? Like, who are you getting ready for?" And instead of like, "You look lovely," someone will say, well, just learn how to speak narcissism. They're trying to tell you look nice. No, I'm not doing that. I don't need a Rosetta Stone to be able to get through a damn relationship. And so they're trying to bring you down, right? The more they can do that, the more they can control. So it's digs, it's passive aggressive, it's comparing you to other people. It's a competition. So let's say that you work in the same business as them, same industry as them. And you could decide to, excel in your own way. And they're like, what do you think? You're going to catch up to me? And it's very dismissive, very contemptuous. They use their tone a lot, very sneering, very dismissive. So sometimes it's not even what they say, it's how they say it. But this doesn't happen once. This happens over and over and over. Sometimes they'll even do the passive aggressive. You've succeeded in that. And they'll say, oh, little Miss Fancy, what are you going to do? Put that plaque on your wall like a 2-year-old? You got a sticker from your teacher? They'll do that too. So it's all so hurtful. But again, and everyone's like, no, it's because they're insecure. I get that, folks. You're not telling me something I don't know. They have to get the digs in because their shame is coming up.
So should you tell yourself in those moments, because I'm always trying to play that, the person that's hearing it, the person that maybe recognizes it, but also the person that actually believes it. And so if you're the person that starts to believe it, what are the things that you can start to do? Because you may know it's a manipulation tactic,
Right.
but also it still can feel very real, especially if they're pressing on the thing that you really are insecure about.
Couple of things. Number one, there's no quick, I mean, if a person's gone through a narcissistic relationship for long enough, and especially they grew up with a narcissistic parent, the voice never goes away. And I say this as a survivor at 57 years old, sitting in front of you, I will never believe what I do is good, ever. I look at the draft of my book, which we'll be talking about in the months to come. I'm like, no one's going to read this. I look at my YouTube. No one's going to watch this. I look at everything I do. I'm not very good. And people are like, how do you not see you're doing good work? I'm like, you know what? Let's not even have that conversation. And I've said this in my own therapy. I said to my therapist, let's be clear. I'm never going to get there. And I'm not wasting any more time trying to get there. I am going to, but what I am going to believe is that I'm going to keep doing work I think is helping people. And when I get the feedback that it's hitting, and it's not even directly from the people, it's my staff saying, yeah, it's working. Here's the numbers. And they're even on to like, we know you don't think you're doing a good job, but the numbers are there. We're doing what we need to do. Bye. You know, so it's that. So my point then becomes is what are the tools you can do? Because all the things we can't do, I do with clients. Number one, you need at least one safe place. You need one person who sees you accurately. So even if you don't fully believe it, because I think people are kidding themselves. If they think, no, I'm going to make this person totally believe in themselves, they'll never talk like that again. Not going to happen. That seed of doubt, it's like a weed in a lawn. You can do whatever, unless you're going to tear up that whole lawn and resod it. There's no equivalent of that for a person. And so you carry it, but then you get plugged into meaning and purpose. You get plugged into great support networks. And you have people tell you, this is good. And they know you don't feel it, but you trust and love them. So they're saying it's good and they'd never lie to me. So I have to believe a little of it, right? So I'm telling you that this is not stuff you solve quickly. This is bedrock that goes so deep into the earth you can't imagine. So it's having the alternate sources of information. It's having the people who tell you it's good. It's finding meaning and purpose, because when you're working on stuff that matters to you and you put your head down, you're like, I think this is good. Like, I think it's good that I get to do, not that I even think it's good, but like I get to do what matters to me. But then over time, having the radical acceptance about the narcissistic person means that you know what's coming out of their mouth is a joke. And you'll forever have some grief that it got to you because you don't fully believe in yourself in other spaces. But at least if you can recognize what they're saying is a joke, it doesn't put a bigger finger on the scale. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. This is deep and big. And there's no magical way that someone's going to turn it off and say, I'm great.
Thank you for being so transparent about that. It seems like you've used that as empowerment to say, like, this is just who I am. I'll never believe in this. How do you see that as empowerment versus someone else that may see that as giving up or like you've lost faith in yourself?
The meaning and purpose piece, the getting up and finding something that makes your heart sing and doing it. You know, and I have to say, if a person goes through enough narcissistic relationships, your life starts to feel like a Hail Mary pass. I'm like, well, everything else has been taken away from me, so I might as well go for it, right? It does have that kind of, that sort of like, all right. You know, it has that flair. And that's someplace I try to take survivors where I'm almost like, what do you got to lose? You know, let's go. And they'll say, okay, you're right. What do I have to lose at this point? And sometimes the thing that makes your heart sing isn't a job. It could be a hobby. It could be volunteering. It could be your faith. It could be your children. It could be your pets. You know, it could be something you start that's small. Like if someone might put together a book club. I mean, again, I'm not talking about like people have to go out and write the great American novel or something. Whatever it is, that thing that is yours. And the key is if you have something you love and that you do in your life, never, ever share it with the narcissistic person, ever. And this is sort of the rule of threes I give people in narcissistic relationships that builds on what we're saying. I always tell them, if you have good news, I don't care if you're still married to this person. I don't care if you still live with them. I don't care if this is your family member. I don't care if it's something you see every damn day. If something good happens to you, never tell them first. Never. You need a list. Make a list on your phone if you need to. And you have at least 3 people, 4 people, maybe 10 people you share the good news with first. Let them say, oh my God, I'm so proud of you. I love you. This is so great. And you get the la, 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 the happiness that people care about you give. So A, if you can, never tell the narcissistic person. And B, by the time you tell them, if you have to tell them, you've gotten the good stuff. So when they're dismissive and sneering and are you a 2-year-old and all that, you're like, yeah, now I got to remember who I'm dealing with here. Let it go. But ideally, don't tell them. Same thing with bad news. Something bad happens. Demotion at work, lose your job, diagnosis of an illness, whatever. Don't tell the narcissistic person first. A lot of people say, I know I'm going to tell them, oh my God, when they find out I'm sick. You know what can happen when they find out you're sick? They're going to abuse you more. You find someone else to tell. Same list. Hey, yo, I got this test. I'm a little worried. To the people who you know can hear it. You'll get a lot of, how can I help? Do you want to talk about it? Then and only if it's necessary, tell the narcissistic person. So that leaves people saying, I can't tell them the good stuff and I can't tell them the bad stuff. What the hell am I supposed to tell them? I said the indifferent stuff. Like, did you hear those coyotes last night? Or, I can't believe it, they changed the sign on that Starbucks. Or, the lane is closed down on Ventura Boulevard. And that's it. And like, well, that's not a relationship. I said, it was.
Why would they abuse you more if you tell them the bad stuff?
Because they're either going to feel like now they may have to step up and do something. They might have to take care of you. They might feel that shame again. I see this a lot with medical stuff. Countless numbers of people who would stick it out in the narcissistic relationship, thought they had radically accepted, they hadn't. And then they get sick, which many people who stay in these relationships long enough do. The stress really takes the body out. And they'll say, okay, now that I tell them I have, God forbid, cancer, I have a chronic autoimmune condition, whatever, they're going to see there's something real happening. I have to go to the hospital. This is it. They're going to sit by my bed, and hospital bed. And usually the first comment is, oh, what now? You expect me to take you to urgent care? Like, oh, come on. You expect me to sit at chemo with you for 2.5 hours? I'm busy. These are quotes I have witnessed. Okay? So people say they wanted to drop me off at the curb at the emergency room. And did. What? I don't like hospitals. I don't like sick people. Really, I'm so busy. Like, this isn't what I signed up for. That's what you'll hear. So for some people, they thought, God, well, maybe when the rubber hits the road, maybe when there's a real need, this person will step up. And the danger of that is they don't make alternative plans. You find someone else to take you to that colonoscopy, folks. Do not count on the narcissistic person. Narcissists will then get mad, like, why did you ask your friend to take you? Like, come on, isn't a husband supposed to take you? And that's when you could say, you know what, I knew you were so busy this week. And she wanted to, she had to go by there anyhow. You make up your little excuse. The whole thing is a farce. There is no, you know what I'm saying? It is bringing up the level of inauthenticity. But no, they don't like hearing the bad news because they feel like now it's almost as though if they don't help, then they're a bad person. And they don't want to feel like a bad person, but they don't want to help. So
what if about then even with the good news, as I assume at some point they're going to hear it, right? Let's say you got a promotion, or let's say something amazing has happened, and you've gone to a party, and let's say you're talking to your friends about it, but they overhear it. Aren't you going to trigger them more because you haven't told them?
Depends on how big the news is, right? Now, like if you've been, I don't know, nominated for a Nobel Prize, you might want to tell them. This is kind of big. But like, I don't know, let's say it's a promotion that was mattered to you, but it's not that much more money or whatever. That's where if their friends are like, oh my gosh, like, did you hear? Like, she's this. And like, how come I didn't know about this? And say, oh my gosh, they exaggerate. They're making such a big deal about it. It's not that big a deal. And you might have to almost downplay what it was because they always feel like they need to be in the know. And right. And so you have to play it carefully. If it's big news, it's the kind of thing that would cause a hubbub or people are going to post it on social media, then get your goodies, get people to, who support you and love you. And then you're like, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe la, 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 la. And then they'll make they'll make a dig. Oh, here we are. We're talking, this is what we're doing. We're talking about you again. But you've already talked with people who have said, we're so proud of you. And then what you're thinking of tactically is like, now I'm out of the woods. I've told them so I have to worry about it now. You just got that out of the way.
God, it's such a, what's the word? Almost like this little like maze, because you think like, okay, they don't want to hear good news, but then surely bad news is going to greet them more warmly towards me. But if they don't even want to hear that, then it kind of puts you back in the foot of like the unexpected. It's, I think, the unknown that also can be quite scary for people, where you think something is about to happen and it doesn't. So if you had to have a knowledge of some sort about when you're in a situation with a narcissist, of when to share, when not to share, how to share, and where to share, is there like oh God, I'm going to say simplistic rule of thumb? I assume it's not going to be a simple thing.
Number one, if it's something that matters to you, like I said, make sure you've sounded it out through other people first, whenever possible, right? If the narcissistic person's next to you and when you find out someone died, you're not going to say, wait, I got to go tell everyone else they died and then I'm going to tell you. I mean, I'm saying like you were away from them when the news came and now, now you've shared it with other people. So one is to turn to your supports first, number one. Number two is read the room. I mean, remember, narcissistic people are interesting. It's not always bad days with them. There are days when they're doing well. You know it. They're whistling a tune and they're having a good day because they got validated. Everything went the way they wanted. They're feeling good for whatever reason they're feeling good. You might be able to step in there a little bit more tentatively and share something. That I think that they might be more able to hear whatever it is I'm sharing with them. A third thing you want to be aware of is, how am I doing today? Can I withstand their having a meltdown and attacking me and dismissing me and being cruel to me or being passive aggressive or whatever they are? Am I up for that before you share something? And this is going to sound gross, what I'm going to say next. Have a bunch of topics already written out in your phone. Little things to talk about. You can't talk about controversial political stuff. Can't talk about, have the list prepared. And say, ask them about themselves. That's another thing that helps. I don't even think it's fair to say what you do in a narcissistic relationship is sharing, because sharing represents a back and forth. And you have to be careful. That's why these relationships are so much work. You are having to read the room. You are having to assess where you're at. You're having to assess where they're at. And then and only then are you going to necessarily make the information sort of known.
Yeah, God, it's such a tricky navigation to do in those situations. And like, even if I thought, oh, he's having a good day, I would then start to doubt, well, if you're the one that's bringing bad news, he's really going to come after you for bringing bad news to his good day.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it could very well be that they'll get mad at you. Oh my God, I was having a great day and now you did this to me, blah, blah, blah. So there's no winning at this. And I think that piece of it, of knowing that no matter how careful you are about this, that you still I think the thing is, people think I can get it right. In some ways, their bad reactions are a reminder of it's really not you. I remember a case of somebody who had told me that she was relatively new in the relationship too. It was like 2-3 months, some red flags, whatever. And she said to the guy, she said, oh my gosh, I am so glad you wore that sweater again. I love how it brings out the blue in your eyes. I thought that the first time. He raged at her. And you don't want to know why he raged at her? He raged at her. He said, what do you think? I only have one sweater? What's your point? Like, what are you trying to do? Seriously? Like, you think I'm a bum? He went off.
So even a compliment can be skewed, yeah. Ooh, that's tricky. You've also laid out some things of just don't say this. No matter what circumstances you're in, don't say this. And so one of them is, don't say oh, I hope, don't get mad, but...
No.
So why, because these are very tactical, and I love getting tactical, because to my last question is that sometimes it can be so nuanced, I'm not even sure how to maneuver. But I really do love how you just lay out, don't say this, do this, because it just gives me more of a prescription to go by. Right. So I'd love to go through a few of them. So the first one is, don't say to someone, don't get mad. Why should you not say that?
I'll tell you this, it's a bad thing to say to anyone. Okay, so even forget the narcissistic people. Never go up to someone and say, don't get mad. Because you're about to tell them something that's going to anger them, and you're telling them don't have an emotion, right? So that's just not going to work. But you may, with a healthier person, be able to say, I am so sorry to have to tell you this, but la 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 la, and then the person have a reaction. If you're going to give that kind of heavy bad news that's going to make anyone angry to a narcissistic person, I would say either, if you could do it in a place where maybe there's other people that could keep you safe, or make sure no one's drinking so maybe he doesn't get worked up and agitated, or whatever it may be, but don't ever preface it with that, because it's actually a little bit gaslighty, but it really gets a narcissistic person incensed because they don't like being told what to do, and you telling them don't get mad as you telling them what to do.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. And when it's kind of like saying to someone like, you just need to calm down. No one ever calms down if you tell them to calm down. And
that's it. Narcissistic people tend to tell people to calm down.
Really?
That's a big narcissist line. Huge.
Interesting. Why is that?
Well, it's because it's gaslighting. Calm down. You're being too emotional.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, you also say, do not say to them, like, do you hear yourself? Like, do you listen to yourself?
Oh, God, no. Because they don't, all right? And what you're doing that's indirect communication, right? Do you hear yourself is not, again, it's actually not a healthy way to communicate, but for a narcissistic person, it will spin them out. Because what you're saying is, what's the corollary to that? You sound insane. You sound terrible. You sound racist. You sound something terrible, right? And so now they're going to experience that in a shaming way, and they're definitely going to rage at you.
Yeah. Okay. And then you also say, don't ask them why. Why
never.
They do
That's
things.
The biggest one of all. So when any of us ask someone why, what are we asking really? What we're trying to get at the core of, in general, is their motivation. Why did you go to the store? Why did you ask him that? Why did you take that job? Why did you make chicken for dinner? Okay? You're trying to understand the motivational process that led to a given decision, right? And I mean, I think if we're having a bad day, not all of us love that question, but it's an unpacking question. Now, narcissistic people are almost detached from their motivations for their behavior. They really are, because they have so much unprocessed, unconscious stuff, shame, insecurity, all of that. They're not able to, they don't have that awareness. So they can't answer your question. Then they feel foolish, and then they get angry.
So it's purely because they can't answer it that they feel like they're being trapped by you?
They feel shamed. I don't know why. I don't know why I do this. Why are you even asking me such a stupid question? How about that why? So they'll immediately lash out. So they don't like the why, not just because they don't know what their motivation is, but also because they're oppositional. They don't like being held accountable. So why'd you go to the store? None of your business. Even though they went to go get milk. They just don't like that accountability. There's an inherent oppositionality built into narcissistic people. Don't tell me what to do. I don't owe you anything. I don't have to tell you what I'm doing. That's a very big part of that personality style. So when you ask them why, they feel like they shouldn't have to answer that.
Yeah, oh God, that's terrible. What about when they're gaslighting you to the point that you end up gaslighting yourself? So I know one of the common traits, especially when, like, if you're trying to leave, people are just like, oh, but if it could just go back to the way it was. And I've heard you say, like, there is no going back to the way it was, as if it was like the good old days. Right. But not only sometimes, I think, does someone manipulate you by telling you that, I think sometimes we almost like gaslight ourselves by, I understand why we want to believe that there were some good old days, but I think sometimes we trick ourselves into believing, oh yeah, if I just don't rustle any feathers anymore, then we'll go back to the good old days. If I don't call them on this behavior that I've now spotted, we're going to go back to the good old days.
Right. So, so let's talk about a person in a narcissistic relationship who still doesn't know what they're dealing with. They don't quite understand narcissism. Might say, why can't we go back to the beginning? They were texting me all the time and buying me gifts, and we'd go on these vacations and we'd have these long conversations, right? That's more of a euphoric recall process where a person wants to go back to a time that you'll never really get back to again because they were trying to win you over, kind of draw you into them. Now, when the narcissistic person basically saying, can we go back to the way it was, is before you understood what the hell you were dealing with, right? So before, it was the whole, you were always giving in, you would fall for the gaslighting, you would doubt yourself, you would, again, they got to remain in the position of power and dominance. So when you do set a limit or a boundary or don't engage with them the same way, they basically are saying, it's a dressed up way of saying, I want to go back to, like you said, I want to go back to the time where you weren't giving me such a hard time. So you have this is the paradox of these relationships. You can make one of these relationships work easy. Just give in to everything and give up on your sense of self. And if you do that, this relationship will work. Don't call them out on their behavior. Just put up with it. And it's almost like being in a cult. A cult works if everyone follows the cult leader. Works just fine. So, well, I just have to follow the teachings of the cult leader and I'll be fine, right? And so the problem is once you see the light, it's pretty hard to go backwards. But then people will blame themselves saying, well, maybe that's just what I did. I've worked with many clients like this. It could be a parent, it could be a partner where they're saying, well, I did change the rule book. I did go along, and then all of a sudden I'm no longer going along. And so they don't like that. And I was like, okay, great. That's good. Go back. Do it that way. No, I don't want to do that. Like, that was dishonest. I'm like, okay, them's your options. And I think all of these things, Lisa, drive radical acceptance because they start to say like, oh, if I do every single thing that they want, then this relationship works. Well, I don't want to be in that relationship. And so, but they'll view it as look back and say, well, these are the good old days because we weren't fighting as much. Things kind of seemed like they would run more smoothly. I've worked with people who went through difficult divorces and will say, yes, I know in the long run I'll be better without them, but gosh, it was so much easier when I wasn't going to court and I loved our home together. And, the financial comfort gets lost. Like people will sometimes look at like there was an order to their lives. The work of therapy, the work of healing is you were in something where you were paying the ultimate cost, which was yourself. And is that worth it? And people will often, we can break them out of the hate saying, no, I don't want to go back. But they will look back and say, I did once have a life that had a lot less conflict in it. I did have a life that was a lot more comfortable, that was easier, where I had less social stigma, whatever it is that they lost when they decided to change up the rules. And what gets even harder is if the people around the person who's in the narcissistic relationship don't understand narcissism, and they'll say, well, you're the one who got to be so difficult. You're the one who's like, is it really them? So because they might think the narcissistic person's great. Remember, they're very good at being publicly facing nice and generous and all those things. So other people might say, well, you're the one who's different now. And in fact, the difference now is you're actually understanding what it is you're dealing with. So narcissistic relationships often open up as very attentive, okay? So this person's lavishing attention. They're focused on you. They're texting you a lot. Many times people will feel very seen. In some cases, it's because this person's everything you want them to be. So they may not even be attentive, but you're so excited about this charming, charismatic, attractive person being interested in you, right? What happens over time, and this is where we see more of the devalue, discard phases of this relationship, is that it's absolute neglect. Like they don't listen, they withhold, they withdraw. And this concept of breadcrumbing is this idea that a person in a narcissistic relationship learns to get by on less and less. So, example I can give is that a person is in a relationship with somebody, there's just sort of less and less connectedness in the relationship. And it's the morning of their birthday, and the narcissistic person says, hey, happy birthday. And the person who's being breadcrumbed is getting nothing. It's like, oh my gosh, you remembered my birthday. And they get excited by someone simply waking up and saying happy birthday, as though they had done all these things for them. Another example of neglect could be something like Valentine's Day. So here's where breadcrumbing meets gaslighting. It could be the kind of thing where it's Valentine's Day and a person is like, oh, I want to do something romantic with my partner. And then the person says, well, maybe we could, it's Valentine's Day. Do you want to do something? And then the gaslight starts with, oh, really? You want me to go spend all this money and pay too much money for dinner? And the roses are going to cost more now? Like, what do you want from me? Were you like a gold digger? So now even that tiny little request, so if people push back on the neglect, the breadcrumbing, they get that whole gaslighted mess. But the breadcrumbed person gets excited by anything. Oh, they actually came home for dinner. Or they're not playing golf today, yeah, because it's raining. But they're like, look, they're actually interested in me. And it's a way, the breadcrumbing is actually sort of a manifestation of trauma bonding. I'm going to justify this relationship. Look, it really works. They said happy birthday to me. But the little things, these tiny crumbs that a person's using to kind of almost make the justification to stay because there's so little to work with. But I want to go back to something you said before. It's like, how do we push back on these? The problem is you don't. That's the struggle of these relationships. There's nothing you can do to defend yourself because no matter what you say, they're going to gaslight you. They're not listening and they will shut a person down. So it is more and this is where the death by 1,000 cuts, especially when the deprivation patterns comes up, because you've gotten over months, usually years, you've gotten used to getting so little from the relationship that it's almost like a person who's living under conditions of poverty and not having enough resources. And you get used to making all the ingredients stretch, to making the groceries stretch to the end of the month, to making the money last to the end of the month, even if it means you're not turning on the heat or whatever it is, you get used to living under those conditions, right? But it takes a toll on you. That's what we know about when people have to stretch like that. It takes a toll on people. So what is more interesting to me, Lisa, is can they push back? No, you can't. You just have to recognize this is not normal. But a lot of people, it's so happening so gradually, they don't always recognize it. This is one of those times, though, where when you start looking at the lives of others. So, for example, let's say you look at someone's life on social media and you're like, that's not always real life, but you might say, this is very different than my life. This is where therapy becomes essential. Because when a person says to me this breadcrumb stuff, I will gently say, is that enough? Because that's not much. If you're saying all they did this day was say happy birthday, I said, did they get you a card? Did they want to have dinner with you? And I've had people say, well, they said good morning. They said happy birthday to me that morning, but they did work late and they didn't come home. And I'm thinking, it's your birthday and they didn't come home to have dinner with you? And like they said they had to work really late. Well, when they came home, they're like, oh my gosh. And yeah, it was your birthday. And then they made me feel really bad because I was crying because it was my birthday and they didn't come home for dinner. And I'll say, oh, well, I guess you don't mind me working late when it buys you all the stuff that you need. And so then I felt really bad about myself. And you see how that shape shifts? So you bring it up, it gets worse.
So it's almost like you're starving, you get a little bite, and so you're like, well, it's better than starving. I may as well take the bite because it's better than nothing. And so you end up in a position of feast and famine. Well, it's not even really a feast.
There's never a feast. But the problem is that person then takes that bite and says, we live in plenty here. There's more than enough here. There's nothing there. I said, this is not enough. And I think, unfortunately, Lisa, a lot of what we're sort of taught in relationships, especially women, is, just make do. We have this very stoic sense of, cope and be strong in the face of it. And you're lucky you're in a relationship or some such nonsense. And so the people who are going through those deprivation patterns, they can really get into this sort of really bleak, lonely space where they also know that if they bring it up, this person is going to attack them. So it's getting them unwedged from that is really, really difficult because they will keep coming back to that one little breadcrumb and acting like it's a meal.
There's two more deprivation patterns that I've recently heard about that I'd never heard. I don't know if you've heard of them before, but one is benching. Have you heard being benched? So it basically means that somebody puts you on the bench. So it's like
they can pull you off when they need you.
Exactly. Yeah. And so they put you on the bench, but they don't want other people to have you. So they just put you on the bench, or it's like the substitute just in case.
Yeah. And this becomes part of the whole hoovering dynamic too. Because what will happen is that the narcissistic person may want new supply. They may cheat on you, or they may end it with you and immediately take up with someone else. But they want to keep you on ice, right? That's really what that benching is putting someone on ice. So ostensibly you're broken up, but they keep sending enough texts. They keep giving a person just enough to make them think, oh, maybe it's going to get better, or maybe we're going to do this, or thanks for giving me my space, and in the new year, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. But what they're doing is they're taking someone new on a test drive. So they really are putting someone on ice. And that's a very common narcissistic play.
Yeah. And the other one I've recently heard that's new is zombieing.
What is zombieing?
Zombieing is basically when you think the relationship is dead and then they come back from the dead.
So it's like they ghosted you, and then and now they come back from the ghost.
Yeah, as if like, and then their reasoning and their excuse is like, oh my God, I've just missed you that much.
Yeah, and that's, again, all of these are under the big banner of hoovering, right? Ghosting is a tricky behavior, Lisa, because some people ghost narcissists because they are so scared of them. They're like, I just want to cut this person out and not give them a way to reach me. And you can do that in the early phases of a relationship. So it's like this idea of all ghosting is bad is not really a thing. That actually ghosting can sometimes have its utility to it, depending on what the nature is of that other person. But this idea of kind of disappearing and then showing back up, like I said, it's not only a form of hoovering, it plays into that fantasy of being chosen. And that fantasy of being chosen is something that's a really terrible setup for narcissistic relationships, because it can play into this cycle of the only thing more seductive than being love bombed is being chosen after someone leaves you and says, I went out there and nothing's as good as you. That's a much bigger fantasy than being love bombed.
Oh, never thought about that like that.
And they're very good at that. Because what will happen too is it could very well be that the next person the narcissistic person meets doesn't want to put up with their nonsense.
Right.
You know, I'm on a one-woman campaign right now to make sure everyone gets this. So the next person might actually see right through them, right? In which case, they're going to come sniffing around for more, right? That's why I'm saying they're trying. I always think of narcissistic people as like being Costco, where we are all the little things they have on the warehouse shelves that they're just going to buy in bulk quantity, and then that's it. And then when we're stale, they're not going to want any more of us. But then they want it still there available to them whenever they want it. That's what, listen, I've known people, Lisa, who 10, 15 years out of a narcissistic relationship, that person will still circle back. Yep.
And will they take them back?
Sometimes, usually not. I mean, but some do. You remember after 15 years, you start to sort of forget some of the acute wounds. Not everyone does. I think a lot of people are like, what are you, never going to do that. But I think for some people, they're so caught by surprise. Surprise is tricky, right? Because when we're caught by surprise, it tends to be a little bit of a sympathetic nervous system response, right? And so we're just we're not on our game. We're almost kind of, it's like there's an alertness, but it's not a good alertness. It's like an astonished alertness. And when that's the case, we don't always attend to the wholeness of the situation. And our curiosity sometimes gets the best of us too. Narcissistic people play on all of these things all the time. But I do think that the thing that's being played upon is that idea of being chosen. For the narcissistic person, it's a power play. I'm going to go back in there. I'm going to nobody can resist me. They have that kind of saunter. And so they think nobody can resist them. That's their whole grandiose process. They're not aware necessarily that other person also has that vulnerability of that idea of being chosen. And our fantasy may be, narcissistic person screws it up with us. We may not know they're narcissistic. They go off in the world for their new person they cheated on us with, or they're going to go date, or they're going to do whatever. And our fantasy is wait till they go out there and they see how bad it is out there and nobody's going to treat them like I do. And they come back, maybe not for that reason, but that's what they say. Most people will take them back.
And then pile on if you have abandonment issues.
Correct.
That must be like the double whammy, where it's like now you've been abandoned, but they've come back to you.
Yep. And that's the fantasy. If you think of any child who has abandonment issues that go into adulthood, it's that the parent was going to show up again.
And let's call cheating what it is. It's betrayal. Now, betrayal's a bigger word. Betrayal can be financial. Betrayal can be how a person shares confidences and secrets. And there's a lot of ways we can betray. But to me, cheating kind of has the Hall of Fame seat in the betrayal Hall of Fame. So when we come to that piece of it, like, are we just supposed to trust? In a healthy relationship, the trust comes naturally. So that brings the huge question of, is it possible infidelity could happen in a healthy relationship? It's very unlikely, but yes, it can, okay? It's more likely to be a symptom of an unhealthy relationship or a pattern we see in an unhealthy relationship. But the challenge of, can I figure out, like, am I just supposed to trust and get betrayed? Well, your other option is to forever hold back and never get to experience the fullness of a relationship. Every time we fall in love, every time we enter into a relationship, we are entering into a risky enterprise. So the balancing act is, I'm just never going to trust, but I'm going to have a relationship, but I'm never going to trust. And so I'm never going to be 100% in. And so when I'm cheated on, I'll be ready for it, which to me is almost like, let's say you live in hurricane country, it would be like forever having plywood over your windows, forever turning your house into a disaster bunker. You'd always be ready for a disaster, but no light would be coming through the windows and your house would look like a bunker. That, you see what I'm saying? So like, what's the bunker equivalent of it being in a relationship? It'd be like, you'd forever be living in that kind of disaster mentality way. So you'd never fully relax. You'd never fully bring your bandwidth into the relationship. So yeah, you trust, and then yeah, your trust would be betrayed. Is there a way to prevent that? I don't think so. The one thing I'm never going to get behind, Lisa, never, I mean, I can't say never enough, is I am sick and tired of hearing people saying, well, these are the things you did, and that's why your man cheated on you. F you. Absolutely not. Somebody cheats on you, they betrayed you. They did something. And this nonsense about, well, if you'd done more of this and that, absolutely not. If that person had a problem with how you were showing up in the relationship, they had the opportunity to have a conversation. Their form of betraying you to make that point, hell no.
Let me start off by saying this, ladies. There is no shame in aging, having wrinkles, or thinning skin. But just like there's no shame in aging, there's also no shame in wanting to do what you can to keep your skin healthy while also feeling and looking its best, aka confident. And so that's why I have to share these products I'm loving from OneSkin, because I've been using their moisturizer for over a month now and I'm absolutely loving it. OneSkin is the world's first skin longevity company, and their products are powered by OS1, a peptide scientifically proven to switch off the aging cells that cause lines, wrinkles, and thin skin. And it's not just me, guys. OneSkin has over 4,000 five-star reviews. So get started today with 15% off using coupon code WOI at oneskin.co. That's 15% off oneskin.co with code WOI. Yeah, fuck. Oh, thank you so much for saying that. That's so powerful, because I think that a lot of us take on that shame or the blame ourselves. And now, instead of addressing the person that did it, it becomes very shameful, and you start to look at yourself and you start to question, what did I do wrong? But I think the tricky thing is, and you'd said it earlier, these are all the things that make a healthy relationship. Some people feel like they have that. The person saying, I love you, the person saying you're my everything. They have kids and they adore the children, and then they still go and cheat. So why do they? What is it that we can maybe understand and grapple with? Because this is, it boggles my mind, Dr. Ramani, how someone can honestly say, I love you, look you in the eye, be kind to the children, shower you with things, and then go and cheat on you.
So 4 answers to that. There's 4 questions there. Let's go backwards to what I called a healthy relationship, right? At no point did I ever say there, shower with you things, give you a lot of attention, love the hell out of the kids. I said respect, compassion, kindness, patience, equity in the relationship, right? To me, the showering is already a red flag. Okay, because it's easy to shower. It's really hard to do with that other stuff unless it comes naturally to you. Empathic, agreeable people are easy to be, it's easy for them to be respectful and compassionate and all that stuff. But if all they're doing is like the things like, they're the best and they get me all these gifts and they post pictures of the kids all the time and we all go to Disneyland, I'm like, yeah, no, we're not at healthy yet. Keep giving me more. Okay? So, but you come to, that takes me though to the next piece of, but they say, I love you. I love you has got to be the 3 most dangerous words in the English language, because it means something different to everybody. When you say I love you to Tom, it means something different than what I would mean when I say I love you. And when he says it, it means something than what someone, on and on and on and on. I think actually something I wish was a required part of every relationship is that you sat down across the table from someone 3 to 6 months in a relationship and said, could you break down what the I love you really means to you? Because I'd love to know what this means. Because for some people, it means very different things. For a narcissist, for example, I love you means I love how you make me look. I love how you praise me. I love that I got someone around all the time. I love how we have sex. I mean, it's all going to be very different. And someone else might say, I love you for, I feel safe and seen and heard. I see so much good in you. I feel blessed that I've learned so much from you. We don't have, and that's the problem, and especially in narcissistic relationships, they say, I love you. And a lot of times people will say, you don't love me, you did all these things. And I'll be like, slow down. They said they love you. They believe they love you. You may not agree with their definition of love. Did you ever sit down with them and find out what that really means to them? So that's one whole different conversation. So they're saying, I love you, you're absolutely right. A person will say, you said you love me. How could you do this? So that now takes us to the last part of your question, which is, why do people cheat? And I think that it's important to understand that there's many different kinds of cheaters.
So before you go into the why, actually, one more thing to just ask you about the I love you part. If you ask the narcissist what I love you means to them, are they going to admit, I love how you make me feel, I love how...
So here's the answer you're going to get from them. Ugh, what? Why you want an explanation? Like, I don't know. Like, dude, I like hanging out with you. Like, I love you. Like, what do you want? I just said I love you. Isn't that what you wanted? They will not be able to break that down for you. And that's what, remember, and again, I don't want to go too far in the narcissism weeds, but one thing that narcissistic people cannot do is they're not clear on what motivates their behavior. It's a real defining characteristic. If you ask me what I love you means to me, I could give you a dissertation. I'm very clear on what those 3 words mean to me. I'm very, very clear. But most people, you know, and many all healthy people I know, they might say, give me a second. Okay, this is what it means. But a narcissistic person will never be able to answer that question and will become very defensive and angry if you were actually to ask that of them.
Okay, thank you. I was just super curious. Okay, and now to the why then.
Okay, so the why. So not all cheating is the same. And I think that that's one of the things we have to keep in mind. And, you know, there's different kinds of cheaters out there. There are, you know, sort of what I call sort of the crime of opportunity cheaters. These are the folks who actually do love their partners and spouses. They do. They love them. They love their lives. They love their families. They love it all. And they're out of town on a convention. Maybe some people drank too much. The colleague they were a little flirty with is at the convention, and a few sloppy kisses and a little bit of something later, they're like, oh God, you know, and it's a one-night thing. Or it might not even be someone they know. It might be they meet someone wherever, out at the bar, they're in the hotel, and that's that. And they never have anything to do with this person again. It's the belief, I'm never going to get found out. We don't even really know each other's names. It could be somebody who often feels very like stuck in their lives, and by traveling and going and being in a different place, they jump out of a role. They may feel very defined and confined in their role, and so they're like, I'm just going to do this thing. But it's more than anything, it's a little bit of rebellion, and it's acting out, okay? Then there are sort of your excitement-seeking cheaters. These are people who may be in relationships that have become quite stale for them, but they feel committed to the relationship. Perhaps they're in a relationship where it's not a frequency of sex that they want, that they're overwhelmed by everything that's happening in the relationship, whatever it is. And again, they may say and actually conduct themselves in a way that they love their partner, but then they're looking for the excitement. They're looking for the excitement of the texts that come in, the fantasy of it all. The excitement-seeking cheater is someone who'll spend hours in their day thinking of the excitement of the cheat. They're getting that additional benefit in a way that we start getting into the whole emotional cheating. Like they're daydreaming. They're not thinking about their partner. They're not thinking about the stuff they're going to do to their family. They're sort of getting caught up in this ridiculous fantasy. But even they would know they're never going to really make a life with this person. There's an immaturity to the excitement-seeking cheater because they're not sort of dealing with the core issue, whether it's that the relationship has become, again, sort of stale and that need maybe for a little more excitement, which is its own, again, sort of, if more than anything, an immaturity. So the excitement-seeking cheater may even get into a long kind of a text sequence with someone before they ever even meet up with the person, and then it might be these really stolen moments, and half the excitement is planning it, and where are we going to meet, and da-da-da-da. So there's that kind of cheating. There are the people who are, I'm going to call this group of cheaters, and I'm making these are designations I use. I'm not saying they're official by any stretch. Another kind of a cheater is, I'm cheating to keep my primary relationship together cheater. They believe that. So these are people who are like, I hate my relationship, I hate my marriage, I hate whatever I'm in. And if I have this other thing going on, it's giving me enough juice to be able to manage staying in this relationship I don't like. And it keeps me from breaking up my marriage, breaking up my family, breaking up this, but this other thing is helping me feel. I don't feel anything. I hate this person. I dislike this person. So I'm going to have this little affair and then, or big affair, and I don't have to address this. Then there are the, I mean, again, and this fourth group is an interesting group because I'm going to call them the online cheaters. These are the people who are getting into electronic cheating relationships with people. It's texting, it's sharing pictures, it's dick pics, it's nude pics, it's they masturbate with each other on the phone, like they'll have video calls. They send dirty texts to each other. They never meet. This might start through DMs. It might be people who meet each other, but it's a back and forth and a back and forth, and they actually never meet. So the person is kind of getting this sort of sizzle in their day, these pictures, these messages, you're the babe, I can't stop thinking about you, babe, you're so sexy, babe. And then all this babe nonsense that's coming up through their really boring meeting that they're having in the middle of the day. And they're getting a lot of juice from that. Then you have your emotional cheaters. These are people who are, in essence, really almost having a love affair, and maybe not sex, maybe a kiss or something, but it's really like, I love you. I've never felt seen like this before. You are my soulmate, such nonsense and all that. Then you have the emotional cheaters. And then you got the narcissistic cheaters. And in the narcissistic cheater world, this is a whole different animal, okay? And in the narcissistic cheating world, you have they tend to be serial cheaters. They're doing it to get validation. They have absolutely no empathy so they're not thinking. All of these cheaters could be argued that some of that is happening, right? They're not, if they really thought about their partner, they would not be sending dirty texts. They would not have fooled around with someone at a convention. They, and again, for even someone who's in a terrible relationship, but is keeping it together for whatever their reasons that they're trying to keep it together, for them, they might say, I don't have empathy for my partner. You're absolutely right. That's why I'm doing this, because I don't care, right? So they're acknowledging it. But the narcissistic cheater doesn't want the relationship to go away because it's serving a function for them, but they're going out and getting what they want. And they will do it repeatedly. Narcissistic cheaters lie about cheating. They gaslight about cheating. They blame their partner when they cheat. All of those other forms of cheating, those folks may not necessarily blame their partners. When they're caught, a lot of cheaters will be like, I screwed up. I am sorry. I feel sick for what I've done to you. You're a good person. You didn't deserve this. Like, that's not what the narcissistic cheater does. The narcissistic cheater will say, you know why I cheated? I cheated because you make me feel bad about myself. If it's been a long time since you've told me, like, I'm great, and this person actually sees me and blah, 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 okay? So they get supply, they do it repeatedly, they don't consider how it affects their partner, they feel entitled to it, they lie about it, they gaslight about it, and they they do it with reckless abandon over and over and over again. They are very good at not getting caught many times because they're so accustomed to doing it, right? So there's that. There's a couple other forms of cheating I'll talk about, then we'll sort of bring it all together. There are people out there who have issues. Some people call it sex addiction. I prefer to call it sort of compulsive sexual behavior. These are people who might be called porn addicts, or they might go to massage parlors. So they really, much like any addict would, they feel out of control. So they may be masturbating 8 to 10 times a day as they watch porn. They may go see sex workers and get a blowjob in the street. They're very completely emotionally disconnected from the sex of it all. They're disgusted by themselves, but much like a drug addict, they almost felt like they couldn't sort of stop themselves. So there's also that kind of there's that sort of cheating group too, all right? So we'll put them in their own place. But as you can see that these are people who are, infidelity is serving a lot of different functions for them. And there is a sort of and at the core of it, these are people who are not communicating well in their relationships, who feel entitled to something outside of the relationship, who are not being mindful and engaging in full empathy at all times for how this is affecting them. And in the case of those, I hate my partner cheaters, it might be a survival mechanism. They're very different people. These cheaters are all very, very different people. So you can see how that one night stand at their teachers convention cheat. It's a great person, best partner, loving, engaged, plays with the kids, loves the partner. The partner wouldn't even have a moment of suspicion, even helped the person pack their suitcase as they went off to the convention, was even calling them every day, not even a moment's suspicion. And when that person comes back, if anything, they're probably going to be full of remorse and guilt and disgust, and might even double down on their attempts to make the relationship good. I'd be loath to call that person a narcissist. Sloppy, messy, immature, unthinking, sure. Some people think that cheating behaviors can have some of their roots in trauma, that these are behaviors that are very much embedded in things like shame, in low self-worth, in distorted scripts and narratives around sex, sexuality, boundaries. So like I said, I'm saying cheating is not a unidimensional thing. It's a very, very nuanced space. So when I work with clients who either are the cheater or have been cheated on, we really have to do a deep dive on what the whole sort of cheating landscape looked like.
And I assume the clients that are cheaters that you've seen as clients are not the narcissist cheaters. Like,
I've worked with narcissist cheaters.
Really?
Oh, heck yeah.
And so do they just sit with you and then give every excuse under the sun?
There's shame. There will be shame. There will be entitlement. There will be a lack of self-awareness. I'm struck with every time I've worked with a narcissist cheater, when I kind of gently try to get them to, how do you think, in many cases it was a man, so let me use that, and it was a heterosexual relationship, but not always. I worked with many gay couples where this was an issue. I'd say, can I ask you something? How do you think your wife would feel about this? I just want to know. And sometimes the reaction would be like, well, she'd be really mad, like I'm a dead man walking if she finds out. And I'd say, that's not that's not how she'd feel. That's how she'd react. Let's go deeper. How would she feel? And they go back to angry again. Why? Because angry is about them. It'll take a few cracks for them to say, she'd be hurt. She'd feel sad. She would, and then I'd have to say, so is that okay with you? You could see that it never even registered for them. They're not even accessing it. It would take a while for them to even in a meaningful way reflect on how their behavior would be affecting this person. That's how entitled they felt to cheating.
And when confronting a narcissist cheater specifically, I've heard you talk about DARVO.
Yes, so DARVO, thank you. So when you confront a narcissist cheater, especially if it's in your own relationship, right? DARVO stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. So let's say you're in a relationship with a narcissist. I'm going to play this out with you. I'm going to pretend you're my partner, and I say, hey, like, what is this? Like, I saw these texts come up on your phone. It's very clear you were meeting someone else last night. You said you were doing da-da-da. And you say, that's not true. That's not, I did not. Absolutely, that is not what happened. Like, and first of all, get the hell off my phone. And no, that's not what happened. All right. So don't like take half a story and make something up. And then you would say, and you know what? Like, I am so tired of living like this. I'm constantly dealing with your stupid accusations. Like, stop doing this to me, Ramani. Like, enough. Stop accusing me. Like, I'm tired of living with a crazy person. I'm tired of living with a person who thinks it's okay to take my phone. Like, you are weird. There's something wrong with you. Like, I do everything around here. I do freaking everything. And now this, I'm done. Like, I can't believe you do this. What's wrong? So now you've attacked me. Then it's reversing victim and offender and say, you know what? Like, actually, what you don't do around here, you sit around all the time, Ramani, you do nothing all the time. And like, I am killing myself to make this family work? Who's the one who took the kids to the soccer game 2 weeks ago? That would have been me. I'm doing it all. I don't even know what the hell you do. And now, but what you are you're great at being the police. But I guess this is my freaking cross to bear, is to be accused of all this stuff all the time. You see what we started with, hey, you were not honest about where you were, down to, I'm suffering in this relationship and it's your fault and you're the reason I'm suffering.
So how do you, how would you approach then somebody if you start to feel like maybe they're cheating? Maybe you see some signs they're going, like, in fact, like going into the restroom and texting, or having two phones and things like that. What other things maybe can we identify there? And then how would you then approach it, whether they're a narcissist or not, and maybe you can break those down?
Well, I think it's going to be different. With a narcissistic cheater, there's no confronting them. There's no, I mean, the best you're going to do is say, you can confront them, but it's not because you're going to get an honest answer. Let's say you have the smoking gun. At some point you get the picture, the person they're cheating with reaches out to you. Like, you've got it. You've got video, you've got pictures, you've got incontrovertible evidence. At the time they can no longer worm out of it, then they'll say, okay, yes, happy? Are you happy? Do you feel better, Saint Lisa? Do you feel better about yourself now that, okay, yeah, I was with someone else. You know what? This relationship has been absolutely horrible for me. So yes, I'm the great sinner of our time that I went and met someone else, okay? But you know what? I should have done this a long time ago. But I knew you were going to go completely bonkers. This is not working. So what they do is they get defensive, they get angry, they use it as an opportunity to criticize the person they've betrayed, okay? And then obviously them in their shame walk off into the sunset. So, but it is all that their anger is coming out of this. They know they're not supposed to do this, right? Narcissistic people aren't psychopathic, nor are they fully delusional. They know this isn't cool. They also know it's going to make them look bad, and they will start trying to do damage control and get out in the world and say, you know, she's making this big deal about it. Like, we were just hanging out, we were friends, and now that it's over, that, yeah, sure, obviously, like, you know, we're seeing each other now, but with always lie. Narcissistic people always lie about the timeline. Always.
It's like, yeah, she was crazy.
It was not only she was crazy, like, we weren't together. Like, we were just texting, we were hanging out, was like nothing. And yeah, then when me and such blew up, sure, we started spending more time together. But like, when you see a narcissistic person quickly go out of a long-term marriage into a new relationship, there was most likely overlap, right? Because it doesn't happen like that, right? That boom, boom means that the groundwork was getting set. And then they will parachute out, or their partner will kick them out. So what I do say, though, is that if you are in a narcissistic relationship and you suspect, you don't have the smoking gun, as it were, there's a shift in the energy. There's suspicious behavior. There's the going into the bathroom. There's texting someone else in the middle of the night. It's them disappearing for long periods of time. It could even be them slipping and calling you another name. It could be obvious. It could be not obvious. But I guess it would be called circumstantial evidence. I can promise you, confronting the narcissistic person on that is going to get you nowhere. So if you're in a relationship like that, the hard work then becomes, in the state this relationship is in now, let's put the cheating aside for a minute. Do you like this relationship? My guess is you probably don't, but you've been trying to keep a toxic relationship afloat, right? So if you don't like this relationship, this is not working for you, and you suspect they're cheating, to take some of that onto yourself and say, I don't want this anymore. But the place people get stuck, Lisa, is they'll say, I feel like I have to prove it. So when I tell people I left, I can tell them it's because he was cheating, right? They want that substantiation, like, right? But I say to people, isn't it enough that you identified this as a relationship where the trust feels flimsy, and you did not feel safe, and you did not feel seen, and you felt like it was emotionally abusive? Isn't that enough of a reason to leave the relationship? It doesn't have to be the great showdown about cheating. You can even say, listen, I don't know if you've been betraying me or not, but all I can say is this is not working for me anymore. Something here isn't right, and I want out. But narcissistic people are so good at gaslighting, is only people with the most extraordinary conviction are going to be like, I don't even care about the evidence. Something ain't right here. I'm out.
The domination patterns are the things that allow them to maintain control. And I think most noteworthy here are things like rage, right? And I've made that part of dimmer, but it's really that sense of I hold the power. I can control you. Now, the domination patterns tend to show up in more severe narcissistic relationships. Sometimes the domination patterns, though, in more moderate narcissistic relationships can show up as somebody taking control of all the finances. I cannot tell you, Lisa, how many people I've talked, especially women over 50 or over 60 who are getting divorces where finances in a long-term marriage or relationship got really intermingled. And the partner would say, you got enough going on. I've got the money stuff and all. They're like, extent of my involvement with the finances every year was to sign off on the tax forms. And yeah, maybe I had my own little account or I had my credit card, but I wasn't paying attention to the rest of it. So many women are socialized to not feel confident with money, to not know how money works. If there's only one thing I wish every woman was forced to do was take a deep financial literacy class, because that's where people get stuck. And when someone's like, I'll take care of this headache, it feels like they're being helpful. Like, okay, they got this covered and we're doing well. Like, look at all this. And then one day when you decide to pull the plug, guess what you don't know a damn thing about is the finances.
Do they normally do that tactic thing as a nice thing of like, no, I'll take it off your hands?
They'll sell it as a nice thing.
Interesting. Why that specifically?
I work in this area. Like, I know this stuff, or I've been doing this for a long time, or, I'm always like watching the stock market, this or that, or especially if they have any kind of thing in business, right? That is often where that will happen. It doesn't happen every time, but that financial domination. And it doesn't look like domination. It's somebody saying, I'll take care of this. It feels so helpful, but they're running the show on everything. And where the first time people might see it is if they ever even stop to think to say, oh, what do our investments look like? Let's say they're watching a show like this, right? They're watching us and say, let me ask about the finances. And I would almost guarantee that a narcissistic person is like, why do you need to say, what, don't you trust me? Like, look how well we're living. I've been managing the finances for years. Like, why would you need to see that? You're not going to understand it. And if you push it, they will get rageful.
And in this tactic, because there's so many different ways that we've spoken about already, where it's like they'll be a little forceful, they'll be manipulative. Obviously, this is a manipulation tactic on their part. This is a game that they're playing on, and for them to be able to take control. But it's interesting that they're nice about it in this one. Is it so that you actually do lower your guard and you're like, okay, this is the thing that they're...
It's a manipulation.
Yeah.
It's a manipulation. It's not like they're like, you're dumb, I don't want you near the money.
That's what I'm saying.
No, it's not that. A malignant narcissist might pull that, like, you don't know anything. You stay away from this money stuff. That's a different dynamic. I'm talking more in the moderate narcissistic range. A lot of folks have said, listen, I was busy with kids. I actually didn't know a lot about how money worked. I didn't get it. They seem to really get it, especially when you have a lot of other things going on. Kids are a classical example of that. You're running around after little kids, especially if you're also working. When all that stuff gets combined, people are like, the last thing I'm going to do is sit here with a report of the money and the stocks and the this and the that. A lot of people feel really overwhelmed by that.
What are the type of dominance? Because I didn't expect you to say that as number one, right? You kind of think when you think dominance is they want to overpower you. So it means like they're going to be trying like intimidate you a little. So I didn't expect the finance thing. What other things like that may we not even perceive as a dominance pattern, but actually it is?
I think another domination pattern we'll see is that there is and this is probably more embedded in the gaslighting pattern, is there'll always be sort of this remote threat of abandonment hanging up. It's almost like it's hanging so far off in the distance you don't see it, but they'll bring it out. So anytime you bring up any sort of like the relationship isn't going the way you want, or you really want to talk some things out about anything, they'll say, yeah, well, if you're not content in this relationship, maybe we should call it quits. That ability for them to have abandonment in their back pocket, if abandonment's your thing. Because for a lot of folks are saying, I wasn't looking to end the relationship. I just wanted to see if we could make it healthier. Which I wanted to say, there was no making it healthier. You trying to create more accountability was them saying, I can't be bothered. But the way they did it is, no, maybe this isn't for you. But they're very, very careful to make sure, because narcissistic people actually are kind of abandonment. They're what we call rejection sensitive, right? Some of them, they struggle with their own abandonment stuff, but if they know you do as well, they will use that as like, I guess you don't want to be in this, and especially if it's a long-term, committed relationship. Most people aren't looking to get out. They just want to have a conversation. But that's another example of domination. It shuts the conversation down. It's just a silent treatment. It's a form of domination. You don't think of that as a form of domination, but it is. If a person knows that if I push too hard, this person is going to withdraw and stop speaking to me, the silent treatment is the ultimate form of domination because we want to break through it. So before long, we're doing anything they're asking us to do to get them to start talking again.
So it's kind of like taking all the consequences of you speaking up, taking action, standing up for yourself, and then creating a consequence that they know you're not going to want. So that anytime, so silent treatment is, okay, if you bring this up, I'm going to be silent. I know you hate silence because to you, maybe silence means being ignored, not meaning, having much meaning in the world. So they're using these tactics. Very interesting. Ooh, that's a tricky one to kind of navigate.
I don't think there is any navigating it. That's the problem. I remember working with a woman once where they lived in a house together with their kids. And at the point we had our session, she's like, we're in our almost 4th week of silent treatment. He literally wasn't speaking. Show up to dinner, say nothing. And somehow coordination was happening and all of that, but you feel like you're losing your mind. It's passive aggressive. It's meant to be, and yet to the world, it doesn't look conflictual. The world is not seeing two people screaming at each other.
Yeah, which makes it even worse because going back to then the gaslighting, am I going crazy, messing with how you feel or think, now just gets even more confusing.
Yep.
All right, and now I'd love to move on to the disagreeable pattern and actually have a quote of yours. I love this quote so much. Oh my God. Never wrestle with a pig. You end up dirty and the pig likes it.
Yes. So that's an old quote. And they do. Disagreeableness is, they welcome a fight. They welcome an argument. It's why narcissistic people often make great attorneys, because they love a fight and they don't shirk from a fight. And they are able to get in there and they can, again, it's a place of domination too, right? So it plays on that need for them as well and that sort of set of behaviors. But they're very disagreeable. They are hostile. They are abrupt. They are high conflict and very conflictual. They are, the lack of empathy falls under disagreeableness. So it is all the stuff that makes everything difficult, right? Asking them to do anything. I always use sort of the dishwasher example. They're so disagreeable that asking them to empty the dishwasher is such a miserable experience that you do it yourself. You're thinking, going through this, listening to them being a spoiled teenager and not emptying the dishwasher is so much worse than taking the 7 minutes to empty it myself. But before long, you can see how this again creates another asymmetry in the relationship. The other person in the narcissistic relationship is having to pretty much keep all the trains running on time. And the only ones that the narcissistic person is involved in is what matters to them. But because it's like, oh my gosh, I can't even bear the thought of asking them to get the kids from the soccer game. And then people will move heaven and earth to avoid dealing with all that disagreeable stuff.
And is that why they're disagreeable? Like, where does that actually stem from? Because I assume they always want to be right.
They always want to be right. So let me tell you what the opposite of it is. It's almost an easier thing to describe the opposite. The opposite of disagreeableness is agreeableness. Okay? Agreeable people are warm, welcoming, sweet, kind, humble, empathic, gentle. That's agreeable. Now think of the opposite. It's who they are. An agreeable person is agreeable. Even if you catch an agreeable person on a bad day, they may furrow their brow and say, oh, this isn't a great time for this. I really, really want to listen to you. I do. I got 27 fires burning. And that agreeable person will feel terrible for the rest of the day that they couldn't do the thing that person wanted them to do and might even text and check in later. But 9 times out of 10, you're with an agreeable person. They're agreeable. They go along and agreeable people are the best. They're great. They're wonderful. Disagreeable is the opposite. And that's the inherent nature of narcissistic people. Listen, you see it as if you could look at home movies of narcissistic adults when they were children, little kids, They were disagreeable kids.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Mean with their toys, mean with their siblings, demanding of the parent, more like, you know how when kids get a little angry, they'll like, blah, 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 they'll bump against the parents like shins or, they're like that as kids. They're like that as kids. They're very oppositional. You brought that up before. The disagreeableness is very much manifested in the, you can't make me do this. Like they're obsessed with, I have freedom. You can't make me do this. That oppositional thing is narcissism 101. Like, I'm thinking, this is such a small ask, but it's as though the gratification of the power of saying, I'm not doing what you tell me, even sometimes the thing you're asking them to do is going to make their life easier. They won't do it because somebody told them to do it. So you always got to figure out the back door, right? Of getting them to do things. If you really need them to do something, it's like everything feels, you almost feel like you have to become manipulative to sometimes get the narcissistic person to do something. You can't ask them directly. And it was very, very interesting because this, it was somebody I'd worked with who she had a chronic illness. So she had to go, I forgot if it was dialysis or something. She had to go get regular medical treatments. And the narcissistic husband was never any help. And she was having her heart broken regularly by this narcissistic partner, never being willing to take her or pick her up from these very regular kinds of medical appointments that she had to go to. And the one thing, and we worked on all the stuff, the radical acceptance, the realistic expectations. As long as you ask him, I explained to her, he's never going to take her. He's going to take you in this grumpy way. You need to work on a plan B. That's really sort of coping 101 when you're with a narcissist. You've got to come up with a plan B. And so, together we worked it out and talked about it, and then came to find out that through a combination of some friends, and also there was like in her town, there was like a service, so you could get a van to take you to a healthcare appointment. You just had to make a request far in advance. And when they weren't available, she had the friends couldn't do it all the time, but she came up with a solution. And so she'd get her bag and go up the stairs, and he'd say, where are you going? And she'd say, well, I'm going to my appointment. And he's like, what do you mean? How are you going to get there? And she said, no, I forgot the healthcare van had a name to the healthcare van. And he's like, what? And it was as though, how dare you? Right? But so it's almost like she took away his ability to be mean to her about it. And she said it felt so good to not ever have to rely on him again for that. That's how people cope with these relationships. There's no version of this where she was going to convince him to not be a jerk whenever she asked for her ride.
What would you do in a situation where you even said, right, go the back door? That's kind of her saying, I'm just not going to allow him to be the mechanism in which I need something from him, so I'm going to solve it. But what about, I still need him to take me, but I don't want him to be mean about it. What's the backdoor possibility there? There's no way of making his ego big that makes him feel good about
in the short term,
her.
Lisa. So if it's a one-time thing, okay, one-time thing, you might be able to like fluff them for a day. Like, you're the best, and oh my gosh, and I'm so lucky.
Right.
Meanwhile, you're throwing up in your mouth the whole time you're saying it, right? So for some people, honestly, they have to weigh out the toll of being that inauthentic and telling this person who's mistreating you how great they are. Like people like I'd rather pay $200 to a taxi than, ask this person to do this or to do this or to do this. And then sometimes you just got to say they're going to, again, is there a version where when you ask them directly to do something, every so often you might get lucky, they might be nice about it, but that's luck, right? It's like buying a winning lottery ticket. Or it's sometimes you're like, I'm just going to have to tolerate their rage because they have to do this thing. Like I have no choice. And so you go in and the thing you're doing is so important to you that you tolerate the rage. That's radical acceptance. Because what people want is they want the version where the narcissistic person gets sweet about the thing you're asking them. They're too oppositional. That's never going to happen.
Let's assume that somebody is either with a narcissist or has someone in their life. I know that you have almost like certain rules that you advise people. So there's one phrase that you use, which is don't give your psychological passwords to them. I love that. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah.
So it's actually brilliant. Again, I want to make sure that so much of this is accumulated wisdom. Was actually somebody I've worked with who said to me, instead of calling it gray rocking, why don't you call it firewalling? She works in the tech industry. And I thought, interesting, say more. And we talked about it. And her husband's a big tech guy. And I said, you're absolutely brilliant, because when you think about a firewalled computer, right? It's very restrictive on what it lets in, right? It'll say this is a virus, don't let this in. And it's also very restrictive on what you let out. Like, and they'll even ask you, are you sure? I say don't. Part of firewalling is I wouldn't give you all my passwords. I adore you, but I wouldn't give you all my passwords, right?
Nuts if you did.
Right. Yes, exactly. And so we don't we're literally more protective of the password we have for some game on our computer than we are with the most sacred parts of our psyche. I'm like, what? That doesn't even it doesn't make sense, but everyone does that. They just hand it over. And so this idea is that you wouldn't just give away your normal passwords. Don't give away your psychological passwords, your deep vulnerabilities, because I'll tell you why, they'll use them against you. Narcissistic people will always weaponize your vulnerabilities. So a lot of times early in a relationship, people open up and they share their vulnerabilities. Something that's really, really sinister about narcissistic relationships is during that love bombing phase, they'll look at someone and say, tell me the thing you least like about yourself. And you're like, ooh, we're sharing. They're putting that in some sort of evil vault in their brain that then when either you're in the devaluing cycle or the discarding cycle, you're having an argument, they'll pull that vulnerability out. It could be about anything. It could be about body image. It could be about something that happened to you in childhood. It could be about your family, a dream you have, and they will use it against you. And for a lot of people, it feels like the air has been sucked out of them. The most vulnerable thing that a person could share, they've shared with them. And it's like, in fact, in a cult structure, it's often called collateral. Like it's like we've got to get something from them so we can almost blackmail someone down the road. It's like that, maybe not at that level, but it's that ability to say, now I've got something on you, so I know I can hurt you. And so that's what I mean about don't hand away your psychological passwords. Don't give away those most vulnerable parts of yourself until someone really gains that trust. People might be sitting there saying, well, are you telling people not to be vulnerable? Oh, absolutely not. I'm saying learn your people. Again, it's that two sets of ways of engaging in the world. And it's about taking a moment to get to know someone. If red flags are coming up, pay attention and hold back. You will get to the vulnerabilities. If this is a healthy person, you'll get there, but you don't need to get there in the first week. But I think so many people want to be heard and seen and understood that they rush to that moment of like, let me tell them everything and now we're in love. And I have watched people be destroyed having people take those vulnerabilities they shared with someone and having them be used against them in all kinds of terrible ways.
Yeah, I very much believe that vulnerability should never be weaponized in any situation. But I do understand that other people accidentally may use a vulnerability in a heated moment and then regret it. So is it how they then handle it afterwards that dictates which...
Yeah. Well, I'm not asking anyone to be superhuman. We've all done it. You've done it. I've done it in a moment, said something and say, oh my goodness. It is that very rapid attempt at making amends, doing the reparations, and not doing it again. Right? You see what I'm saying? So you can't just keep doing it, because one thing narcissistic relationships often consist of is the apologize cycle. It's like the rinse, lather, repeat. Like, I'm sorry. And they do it again. I'm sorry. Do it again. I'm sorry. No, I mean, I'll give you one, saying I never should have said something like that. Then don't do it again. And when they do it again, it feels like then I'm sorry is just like a get out of jail free card. Like, okay, I'm just going to use this again. And so it really, it's the intent and it's how quickly the reparations take place that a person immediately says, I had no place doing that. And I got to tell you, Lisa, in some cases, there are no fly zones. Like I'm a parent, for example. You would say anything to me. You go after my kids, we're done. We're done. And when I work with clients, I tell them it's okay to have those no-fly zones. It's because some say I'm being too extreme, right? I'm like, oh, do I really shut someone off? I said, you're okay with doing that. If they went to a place that feels sacred to you, that feels untouchable to you, and it went there, that's abuse. That's a violation of a primal boundary. It's okay to say never again.
Does that apply to everyone in your life, like your parents as well as a partner?
It gets tricky there, Lisa, because I think, especially if you had a narcissistic parent, one of the most painful legacies of a narcissistic parent is that they will use those vulnerabilities against a child. One thing I've classically heard with narcissistic parents and their children is they go after appearance. They go after weight. They go after how someone looks. Because it is a superficial personality style, right? And they often want their child to be a reflection of how they want to be in the world. And if it may not be straightly appearance, it might even be things like an ability. It might be things like soccer or school or whatever it may be, right? And so in those cases, the parent, knowing that the child struggles with whatever, will actually use that as a way to manipulate the child or get the child to do what they want. And then the child sort of lives in this sadness, or they'll try to be what the parent wants them to be. The kid will say, oh, if I could play tennis really well, then my parent would pay attention. And maybe they're just not a natural tennis player. And then the child really goes out and tries to hit a tennis ball and whatever. And then the parent's like, oh, really? Like, you want me to waste my time playing tennis with you? Like, this is way below me, thinking like, oh my gosh, this poor kid's killing themselves to get you to notice them. But this will fast forward into adulthood. They will continue to do this to their child in adulthood. Parents are tricky. Narcissistic parents are tricky because a lot of people, for example, may love one parent and really have had a difficult other parent. Some people will feel as though really had a difficult parent, but I love my siblings, I love my grandparents. And those other people in the system don't want you to distance from that one parent. I always say to people, once you identify the difficult people in the system, you can still be in that system, but you got to be mindful. So it really does about maybe limiting the time, finding a time away from the narcissistic parent to be with those other people, like your grandparent or your sibling or your other parent or whatever. And also to recognize you were the child, they were the parent, they dropped the ball. It's not your job to go back there and teach them. And I think a lot of people I've seen 50-year-old people still be hoop jumping to get and trying to show off for a parent, no different than a 6-year-old trying to juggle in the living room just to get their parents to notice them. It doesn't stop. But the hurt that a narcissistic parent can inflict on an adult child is just as potent as if that person was 5 years old.
Ooh, have you noticed a correlation between people that have had narcissistic parents that then go for a narcissistic partner?
Yeah, there's an incredible vulnerability. And I talk about this. I talk about people who have sort of are narcissism magnets without knowing it. And one of the things on that list of magnets is exactly what you're saying, having come from a system characterized by this. There's a couple of reasons. One of the most intoxicating, tragically intoxicating things a person can experience is familiarity. When we say, ooh, we have a magical connection and I'm having a deja vu, I kind of put my head in my hand saying, no, 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 this is not good for you. Because the things that are familiar to you are actually quite toxic and poisonous. And that sort of familiarity of, for example, it's something we call working through. I couldn't win over my narcissistic father, but I'm going to win over this guy.
Ah.
Right? And so then they go right into that same cycle. And because it's so familiar, it's almost hard to get that view to say, this isn't healthy for me, or to get out. Because the whole life almost becomes this activity of trying to get this, trying to do all the things. I'm going to jump through the hoops. I'm going to win this time. And a lot of times people will convince themselves, like, if I can get it right here, then it'll be okay. Then I would have, sort of figured out what I needed to figure out from childhood. But the fact of the matter is, this adult narcissistic person is going to treat you as badly as your narcissistic parent. And this time it's going to get uglier because it'll be things like the gaslighting and the manipulation and the rage. And for some people, that inner dialogue, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I have no right to be doing this, who am I to be pursuing my dreams, I need to stay in my lane, all of that stuff, that kind of inner dialogue, when it gets reinforced by a partner, people actually really get stuck in relationships.
That's what I was going to say. You just listed a few. Can you repeat those actually? And what are the things that, essentially interesting, it never dawned on me that this is the language we say to ourselves, I'm not enough. What are you doing? Stay in your lane. Is that the same language then that a narcissist would also say to you as like a red flag?
Absolutely.
Like if they say to you, stay in your lane.
Absolutely. They say, stay in your lane. You should. And you know what it is? It's more, they do it more masterfully than that. They plant just enough of a seed of doubt
that you're the one who ends up cultivating that seed. So they'll say things like, really, that job? Like, okay, I get why you'd want to do it, but you sure that's not you getting ahead of yourself? So it's just enough like, okay, go ahead and do it, but you sure about that? That's the kind of thing that they'll do. So now this thing you thought you could do, already they've put this new seed of doubt in there, or saying, things like, oh, I don't know, other people at that job, they seem to have gone to some really fancy universities. Like, it's cool that they want you, but you sure about that? And then for many people, that's when they'll give up on themselves.
Yeah. Can you actually truly be happy in a narcissistic relationship? Because not sharing your vulnerabilities with someone, not listening when they give you advice because you don't trust them, because you're worried that they're trying, oh, are you sure you should go for that job? Like, I really want to be able to take my husband's advice for true advice. And so not being able to share that, not being able to, I've heard you say that not to share your wins with a narcissist.
No, not your wins, not your losses, and not your vulnerabilities. Don't share any of them.
Okay, so I want to go down that, actually not sharing the wins, but if you don't mind, like, can you actually then truly be happy?
It's almost a philosophical question, isn't it? Right?
Really is.
I don't know that a person would ever be fully happy or satisfied or nourished in that relationship. I have seen people, amazingly so, figure out workarounds where they derive, I don't know, joy from their kids, their pets, their hobbies, their jobs, their other supports in their world, if provided the narcissistic person in their life isn't super controlling. Obviously, all of that gets very difficult if the narcissistic person has someone on a really sort of a short tie to say, like, you can't do this, you can't do that, and really isolates them from their world. When that dynamic is in place, I do not think it's possible to be happy. But if you're in a situation where you're kind of able to do some things that matter to you, I've seen people sort of carve out moments of happiness, but if this person's a day-to-day fixture in someone's life, not so much. I mean, I do think it takes a toll. And I've worked with people who've been in these relationships 30, 40, 50 years, and it hollows them out.
Is that inevitable?
I do think it's somewhat inevitable. How many times are you going to be invalidated? How many times is somebody going to walk around in the world and feel completely unmirrored in what is to be a loving relationship? And especially if they aren't able to build up those other spaces in their lives. Some people figure out the workarounds and they recognize, like, okay, this is not what I would have loved for myself or wanted for myself, but I will try to make the most out of what I can. And then they take almost a very existential point of view. This moment's beautiful, I'll be in this moment, kind of thing. And so they do their best at sort of deriving the joy from a given moment here. And it's again, that's a sort of high level existential work. It's hard to do because you look around at other people and they are in love and their partners are appreciative of them and they are in a loving space. And their experience has absolutely no resemblance to that. They feel very alone. And keep in mind, Lisa, most people don't get this. I've worked with so many folks who they go out and they're like, finally, I figured out why this relationship's so difficult. My partner's really narcissistic. They have no empathy. The whole laundry list. And people are like, I don't get that. Like, you look good in pictures together, or it seems like you're both at the dinner together. And so it's this people not getting it. Like, well, it can't be that bad. Can't you just explain to them what's going on? No, because they're not listening. And that's hard. Imagine a child growing up with parents who never see them, who never hear them. When I say see them, like notice them, never hear them, never have empathy for them, never have interest for them. A lot of people grow up like that. Now jump that into an adult relationship. It takes a tremendous toll on a child. As an adult, you're not immune to those same effects, especially in what feels like it's supposed to be your primary close relationship.
Yeah, God. And how many of people, though, actually in those 30, 40s, because you said some people stay like for the rest of their life, still try and change them? Because I love it when you're like, you can't change him. But how many people just like, yes, but if I only did this, and is that, how much of that is why people stay in those relationships?
Well, there's kind of a standard, there's a short list of reasons people stay in the relationships: hope, fear, guilt, and lack of information. Okay? Hope that it'll change. Well, we've thrown that hope out. Fear of being alone. Some people say that the devil I know is better than the angel I don't. Like, they're saying, I know this. I know how this works. I know our respective families. I have a routine. They're scared. They're scared. They're scared of living alone. They're scared of having their role in society change. They're scared of no longer perhaps being in a marriage or something like that. Then there's guilt. Remember, not all narcissism is just the big exploitative, grandiose person like kind of holding court and sucking all the oxygen out of the room. In many cases, there's what we call vulnerable narcissism. And that's more of this sort of sullen, resentful, angry, victimized form of narcissism. So instead of the entitlement coming out as, hey, I should be the VIP in the line, the entitlement comes out more as, nothing ever works out for me. I deserve so much more because I'm such a smart person. It makes me sick to watch all these other people succeeding when I'm so much smarter. See, that's a different feel of entitlement, right? Mm-hmm. And that vulnerable narcissistic style actually takes a tremendous toll in relationships. But when people want to leave those relationships, they feel really guilty because there is this sort of very anxious, depressed feel. And then there's lack of information. The number of people out there saying, well, maybe if I just learn to communicate, maybe if we go to a couples retreat, maybe if we do this, maybe if we do that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're about to spend $100,000. I'm telling you for free, this is not going to change. Make your decisions accordingly. I'm never telling anyone to leave. I'm saying this, it's like a person moving to a really hot climate and wanting to wear a down parka. I'm like, that's not going to work. You're going to have to get a new wardrobe. Like this is not what you think it is. That's it. I don't want anyone watching this thinking it's black and white. Like one day I'll go up this. It's a process. I always say that there's the click moment. There's a moment in your mind you're with someone and you're like, okay, I'm now a little uncomfortable. It's often a red flag, but it's a little more than red flags. By now you've probably seen 5, 10, even 15 red flags. And it is, it's like an audible click. You're like, okay, now I'm uncomfortable. What do I do? At the moment of the audible click, people are still saying, okay, maybe I'm reading this wrong, but we're starting to step out of the room backwards. Like we're creating more and more distance. Like, okay, this isn't cool. This is not an affiliation I want. This is not a relationship I want, whatever. Slowly start stepping away. That moment of starting to identify it and then get out, that's what's being called hang time. Here's where it gets tricky. If you are the one who decides to leave a narcissistic relationship, I can guarantee you it's going to go badly. It'll always go badly. We don't always realize this, but people who have narcissistic, difficult personality styles struggle with abandonment because it means they've lost control of the narrative. So if somebody tries to leave them, all hell's going to break loose. All hell's going to break loose. If they decide to leave you, they're just going to go. But if you decide to leave them and they don't want you leaving, you are in for the fight of your life. And this is why it's important to identify and get out of it early. The earlier you get out, the less the harm. But if you're in for a while and they don't want out, it will be an absolute mess, which is why hang time's an interesting moment, because for some people during that suspension, they're hanging in there saying, how big a mess is this going to be when I leave? So some people stay because they're so afraid of the disaster that's going to ensue when they leave. And when I work with folks who are about to start, for example, embark on a divorce from a narcissist, I'll tell them, for as bad as you think this is about to be, it is going to be 10 times worse. We are going to battle, and I will not soften this for you. And every single time, whether it's a marriage, whether it's workplace, whatever it is almost like these people look shredded when it's over. And a couple of them have said, I'm so glad I'm out. But had I really known how bad this was going to be, I don't know that I would have had the courage to do this. All of that stuff keeps people stuck, okay? But even once people recognize that and they're like, no, despite all of that, I'm going to do the courageous thing. I'm going to step out of this. Then they step out, okay? A couple of things happen. Most classically is the phenomenon of hoovering. Now, hoovering, and you know this as a Brit, is a vacuum, right? So you know it better than Americans. Like, Americans are like, hoovering. It's a vacuum. Yeah. So it's sucking someone back in. And hoovering is a common narcissist tactic. Now, not every narcissist hoovers. Sometimes they move on into their own future thing without you. But many times they do. It's a power play. It's a dominance play. It's a way for them to feel in control. It's game playing. It messes with your mind. It's manipulation. But hoovering is when the person's left. They're already struggling with the hope, the fear, the guilt, the pity, the trauma bondedness, all of that. And then the narcissist, I don't know, 2 months out, 3 months out, even 3 days out, texts like, hey babe, I miss you, or like, been thinking about you. And this sort of the fantasy version, that love bombing version of the narcissist sort of starts to emerge again. And you think, oh yeah, I was right. See, hope. And in fact, some people, when they step out, enjoy that sense of power of like, oh, if I step away from them, then they become nice again. And that's a trauma bonded dance. In the relationship, out of the relationship, in the relationship, out of the relationship. Recognizing that the narcissistic person loves games in relationships. They love the chase. They love the hoovering cycle. So some people really can get very vulnerable to getting sucked back in and almost enjoying having the narcissist trying to win them over. Well, as soon as they get them back in, they discard them. It's like a child with a toy they don't really want. They just wanted to get it away from their brother or their sister, right? So that hoovering trap is a big one for someone to be resistant to, because every trauma bonded cell in their body is saying, I want to go back, you know, and you have to say, no, 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 no. It's almost like, don't walk towards the light. In this case, like walk the other way, whatever the other way is. And so that's a huge risk, okay? But then we have to add into that, Lisa, things like societal pressures. And this is where we talk about enabling. The enablers, to me, in many ways, are as dangerous as the narcissist. The ones who are like, oh, they're not so bad, or you just got to give them a chance, or come on, the devil you know. And they'll say things that will not only attempt to sort of downgrade the harm the narcissist is doing, but then leave the person who wants to step away from the relationship feel shamed, foolish, like they're making a mistake, because that person who's leaving the relationship is already struggling with that. Right. So if the enablers are stepping in and they're saying like, oh, you sure you know what you're doing? Then there's already so much doubt in the mind of the person leaving. So now this enabler is pouring all this new doubt in there. And again, there's a lot of shame around that, like, who am I to think I could step away? Because narcissistic abuse really undoes a person, leaves them feeling like they're not enough, leaves them feeling like they're full of self-doubt, they're confused, and they really start believing like, who else will have me? Who cares who else will have you? We just want to get you away from that person. But the enablers can really do a number on a person, as well as society. You know, like we're making this episode around the holidays, right? And so you can't be alone during the holidays. I can't tell you how many people got stuck in narcissistic relationships for another 6 months because it was the holidays and they didn't want to leave because of the holidays. And I'm like, oh my gosh, just go get drunk under a tree somewhere. But like, please don't let this be why you end up signing up for more. So you can see that it's society, it's enablers, it's your own demons. All of that colludes to make not only leaving, but even walking that first block out of the relationship really, really difficult.
I love how you frame it, and then also like I would love to get some like real tactics, because I'm always that person where like if I'm emotionally not feeling, like if I'm feeling vulnerable, I need tips and tactics to actually either do or say in those moments to not then just let my heart follow, get hoovered back in basically. So I actually want to start with hope, because what are the language that people say, that narcissists will say to you, to bring back that hope that you can kind of be wary of, that becomes a flag? So for instance, I know that you've said when someone says to you like, oh, it's never going to happen again. So things like that, what are the things that they're using to trigger your hope?
It's never going to happen again. I'm going to go get therapy. Give me another 6 months. This has just been a rough time. The holidays are tough for me. Valentine's Day is tough for me. Your birthday is tough for me. My birthday is tough. They'll keep linking it to anniversary dates, holiday dates, and say, let's just get through this holiday. Let's just get through the summer. Let's just get through the fall. I'm like, okay, we've got all 4 seasons, so we just going through. Right. So it's always this idea of, let me get through this review at work. Let me get through this deadline. So in essence, you're always being put on ice, right? That's that future faking, but that's how the hope gets cultivated, because they're saying like, I'm aware there's an issue, right? So when somebody says that to you, I'm aware there's an issue, that fosters your hope. But basically they're saying, and you're not important enough for me to adjust that right now.
Oh my God, that's so true. And then thinking about, I know a lot of women that have been hurt and are wounded, and so they look for that in a partner because they feel needed. I can help fix them.
Yeah.
So even with the guilt part, I think that how does someone work through that?
That might be one of the hardest things of all to work through, right? Because especially when you're dealing with somebody who's a very manipulative, vulnerable narcissist, they use their victimization as a tool. Like, oh, nothing ever goes my way, and life is so unfair to me, and I can't, who's ever going to want to be with me? Now, often even a vulnerable narcissist, their tactics are interesting. They'll even put themselves down, like, oh, if you leave me, who's ever going to want me? And if they're with somebody, and usually vulnerable narcissists are with rescuers and fixers, right? They're not the big, flashy, grandiose narcissists. These are the ones who are, again, very victim, very sullen, very resentful, very angry and brooding and all of that, that the rescuers will feel like, oh God, like this is this poor person. And so it really is, the work then becomes, is to say, your empathy and compassion are such beautiful things. However, I want us to take a minute and really list all of the unhealthy patterns in this relationship. Because what's happening is you're basically staying in something that's noxious, that's unhealthy. It's almost like being next to like a chemical dump site and smelling in all the chemicals, or next to someone who's smoking a cigarette or something and blowing the smoke towards you. It's not good for you. And so that idea of helping someone see that you can retain your empathy and compassion, and you can also preserve yourself, and your job on this earth is not to rescue another capable adult. That responsibility lies on them.
Wow, that was so amazing. Thank you for that, because I really do worry about those situations where people do just take it on themselves as their responsibility. And you're 100% right that they'll lock it away. Like the phrase that came to mind is you teach people how to treat you. And that phrase really hits me. And so when I think about things like that, it's like you mean so well. And that's the thing, right? People mean well.
Right. And that phrase though, Lisa, it's tricky. You teach people how to treat you, because so many people were never taught how to be treated. You see what I'm saying? So I think that there's a real risk with that one, because many people came from homes where they were invalidated as children, where they were not valued, where they had no empathy shown to them. It came from family systems characterized by narcissism and antagonism and high conflict personalities. So nobody taught them. So this idea of they don't know how to teach someone else because they themselves don't know. I'm not even going to say they're teaching people. One of the key elements to remember about the narcissistic relationship, it's why currently the world of mental health is not serving this group of people who's going through narcissistic abuse well. We make it all about responsibility, and we put all the responsibility on the person going through narcissistic abuse, and they're already blaming themselves. But the person who's behaving badly really is the narcissistic person. Right?
Right.
And since the world is telling this person in the relationship, maybe you shouldn't leave, or everyone deserves second chances, or why don't you forgive, they're getting that messaging. They themselves are confused. They've been gaslighted. They've been manipulated. They think all of this narcissistic person's behavior is their fault.
Right. So you feel like that framing actually, they will take on the blame, which obviously doesn't serve them.
Correct. Yes, so I think this idea that they have this person in the narcissistic relationship thinking that they can take all this responsibility and have all this power, they actually can't and don't, because this is so manipulative. And even the mental health profession will say, well, what's your role in this? I said, this is like saying what someone's role is. Somebody gets punched in the face and said, well, does your face really need to be in the way? So that's the challenge. That's really, really the challenge. And I think that ultimately the survivor and the experiencer of narcissistic abuse will get their power back, but not while they're in the toxic situation. We got to get them out a little bit. And that's why therapy with somebody who understands trauma, domestic violence, narcissistic abuse, like therapists who understand those things are often in the best position to work with these individuals, because the focus is to not blame them. But unfortunately, a lot of times the conversation is about like, well, teach them. You can't teach, they're inaccessible. They cannot be taught. They cannot be anything. They're entirely egocentric. So even if you try to teach them how you want to be treated, they ain't listening because they have no empathy. They don't care. You're merely an object to get them what they need.
Wow. Okay. So actually, correct me if I'm wrong, so you're saying the real healing must happen after you've left the relationship?
Or it has to, because again, I always want to frame this as not everyone can leave. And I don't want anybody watching this to feel like, well, if I can't leave, does that mean I'm never going to heal? Absolutely not.
because I completely understand for reasons of money, fear, culture, children. There's reasons people feel like they can't leave, and those reasons are valid. I am very mindful of never invalidating the survivor's experience. So even if you're still in it, there are things that can be done towards healing. The key, if you leave, obviously the more distance and time, but I'm going to tell you, girl, there are people who leave these relationships and their head is as much in these relationships as somebody who's physically still in the relationship, right? Whether you're physically in the relationship or physically out, you got to get your head out of that game too, right? People keep giving away all of their precious mental real estate to the narcissist by ruminating, by having regrets, by looking at social media. What are they up to? Is the next person getting a better version of them? No, there's only one version. It's like Narcissist 1.0. It never gets better. For the survivors, there's 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. You're going to keep evolving. They're always going to be the same version. The next person's going to get exactly what you got.
Wow. So do you handle then the healing and the same, whether you're in or out, or is it actually there's different tactics for both?
Slightly different, but again, it's really addressing things like rumination, understanding processes like grief, not falling into the sort of the vortex of what I call euphoric recall. Euphoric recall is remembering only the good things about the relationship.
Oh my God, yes. So why do we do that?
Again, it's part of the trauma bonded experience because it's the justification and rationalization. It actually kind of flies, it goes against what our human brain is designed to do. The human brain, unfortunately, is actually uniquely positioned to remember bad stuff more potently than it remembers good stuff. That's a survival mechanism that's in our brain. So, you know, if we remember the bad stuff, then we remember that was a poisonous plant, that's a dangerous ravine, there's a tiger over there. Like, we need to remember those bad things so we don't die, right? So there's an evolutionary piece to that. And in fact, there's actually a guy named Rick Hansen who wrote an amazing book called Buddha's Brain and does a lot of work in this area. And he often says, like, some of his work is on how do we almost retrain the brain to remember the good stuff. Well, in people who've gone through narcissistic relationships, this is where the trauma bond creates this interesting hiccup. They'll remember bad things about other stuff like being alone, but they'll remember the good stuff about this narcissistic relationship. It's often an artifact of childhood. So for people who had narcissistic or invalidating or high conflict environment childhoods, kids really don't have options. So they have to tell themselves stories and give themselves rationalizations that somehow this mess that's floating around them is okay. Well, mommy really loves me, she's just really busy. And daddy really loves me because remember that one day he took me to throw a baseball after 200 days of yelling at you. You know, so the child has to mine those good experiences out of it to survive. Right? Well, that experience then jumps into adulthood. That's that trauma bond. It's a long-term experience. And so in adulthood, the more toxic the relationship, the more the trauma bonded person says, like, but we had that great night in Miami, or they did get me that nice present that one Christmas 30 years ago. You know, and then they will forget all the abuse, yelling, invalidation, gaslighting, infidelity, lying, whatever it is. And that's why one of the things I do with people as part of their healing journey is I have them make a list. I've colloquially called it the ick list. I don't know, I've called it something else, but it's like ick. And I said, I need you to write down every terrible thing they did to you. And if you can't remember it all, I need you to call friends. I need you to go through your calendar. I need you to look up anniversary dates. I need every bad thing written down. And some people are like, I don't want to do this. This makes me sick. And I said, it makes you sick because we're cutting the trauma bonds. You have to, this is like putting up an ugly mirror in front of you and saying, this is what this relationship was. And every time you want to go into that euphoric recall, I need you to look at that list.
If you want to know exactly what to say to a toxic person that will make them regret ever messing with you, then click here right now. What is the #1 thing that traps women in toxic relationships, and what can we do to finally take our power back?
This is where our boundaries, right, our